and watched the Republicans in Washington and thought to yourself, these people have very different priorities from me. I didn't vote for them in order for them to do the things they're doing now. They seem to care about things that have nothing to do with my life at all. In fact, it may have occurred to you, they may secretly hate me, and you may be onto something. But have you ever asked yourself what it would be like to work among them, to be an elected Republican in Washington who actually believes something and actually wanted to represent your constituents? What would that be like? Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene found out a couple of terms ago. She's from the state of Georgia. She was elected to Congress. She's had an amazing 2 terms there, and she's written a new book about it called MTG. She joins us now. Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd never met you. I didn't know anything about you. I don't follow this stuff very carefully. And the first time I heard of you was in an explosion, a Vesuvius of news stories, calling you a crazed Nazi, anti-Semite, and attaching you to the phrase Jewish space lasers. And so I thought, well, that's kind of a crazy thing to say. So I look it up, and it turns out you never said that. And it had nothing kind of to do with what you said. And then I watched the Republicans in Congress. It was a smear job, very obvious. A 2-minute Google search proved that. And then the Republican leadership in Congress immediately attacked you on the basis of the smears without even looking into them. And I thought, well, I'm not really surprised because that's who they are. But what was that like from your perspective? I've always wondered.
Shocking. As a matter of fact, in January of 2021, all of Washington and the media, the national media, created a character of me that didn't exist. And then they sold that character across the news platforms, all across the country and across the world, 24/7. And Washington bought into it too. And so every single day I showed up to work, all of a sudden I was like this toxic poison member of Congress in Washington. And it was attacks day in and day out. It was something I'd never experienced before.
So, but it's a little weird. I mean, look, I think partisan loyalty can go too far. I think if you like drive off a bridge drunk and kill a woman, as Teddy Kennedy did, your party shouldn't defend murdering a woman.
Amen.
That's my view. However, if you're being unfairly smeared, I think it's fair to hope that your party will defend you against an unfair smear. So what's the point of having a leadership if they don't defend their own members against lies?
Well, because I wasn't, I guess, in line, so to speak. I was completely from the outside. No one had propped me up. No one had told me to run. As a matter of fact, I never even went to a GOP meeting anywhere until I announced that I was running for Congress.
So you didn't go through the normal process.
I didn't go through the normal rank and file, and then I beat a candidate, a Republican candidate that was highly supported by the establishment in Washington, Steve Scalise. Over 30-something members of Congress had raised money for him, endorsed him, and then I beat him by double digits.
In the primary?
In the primary.
Oh, I didn't know this. So that was your actual sin.
Yeah.
They were mad at you before the Jewish space lasers thing.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's right. I wasn't one of them.
So looking back on it, and I'm sure you must on some level still feel rage. It makes me mad just thinking about it. But trying to coolly assess it, where do you think you differed from Republican leadership or the Republican establishment on policy? Like, what didn't they like about your views, do you think?
Well, I came in and my views were concreted not only from how I grew up in a small business, not a wealthy family, in a family where my dad was literally living the true American dream. My father, Robert Taylor, owned a construction company, the company that I bought after college. Started out so poor. They had $500 for their name when I was born. And they just worked hard, and I learned all their lessons growing up in the company. Went to college. After college, I bought my parents' company. I had to buy it. It wasn't given to me. It wasn't I wasn't a trust fund baby or anything. And so I actually had to earn it. And I truly believe the things that I say, and I think that made me the greatest threat to Republicans and Democrats in Washington, is I am sincere.
It was interesting, though, because I kept reading you described as this crazed radical, which isn't all bad. Sometimes we need crazed radicals. Now may be the time. But at the time, whatever it was 4 years ago, I looked at your positions, and they didn't strike me as crazed or radical. They seemed pretty mainstream to me, like we're kind of just normal concerns. Right. Am I missing something?
Yeah, you're missing that Washington doesn't care about normal Americans and normal American ideas and normal American values. And I carried what was extremely normal in real America, and I brought that with me very loudly and passionately in Washington, D.C., and they tried to kill me for it.
So foreign policy is one of those things that I don't think most people who aren't involved in this or live in Washington think about quite as much. But that kind of is the red line, it feels like, for a lot of these people in D.C.
Well, if you don't fund the foreign wars, if you don't wear the country that is fighting, that you're supposed to be supporting, if you don't wear their flag or wear their little colors in your front pocket of your jacket, if you don't have a sign outside your office door that says, I stand with Ukraine, or whatever the flavor of the month is, then you're going against Washington. You're going against the Pentagon. You're going against the military-industrial complex, and you will pay the price.
But shouldn't the Congress has oversight over all of those institutions, the Pentagon, of course, the intel agencies, the entire executive branch. Congress funds them and has oversight over them. They shouldn't be mindlessly carrying their water or acting on their priorities, right?
They shouldn't be, but here's what's interesting about how fundraising works in Washington. If you're a member of Congress and you have to get reelected every 2 years, you need money to campaign. You need money for your ads. You need money for the literature you mail people. You need money to encourage your voters to get out and vote. Well, it's hard to raise that money. So in Washington, the military-industrial complex and other big industries have all of their lobbyists. Well, they can host you a fundraiser literally in one night and raise you hundreds of thousands of dollars as a member of Congress, and you won't have to spend hours on the phone calling donor after donor, begging for, can you give me $1,000? Can you give me $2,000? Please, I really need your help. I got to get reelected. I've got 5 primary opponents. These members of Congress don't have to continue doing that hard work and begging and begging and begging for money from other donors or from their districts, when they can walk in a room, have a cocktail reception with little weenies on a stick and a bunch of alcoholic drinks, and they're getting written big checks over and over by all of these lobbyists and all of these big companies, major companies that really thrive on American taxpayer contracts that our federal government hands out.
The companies that make Washington the richest metro area in the country.
That's right.
Did you think it was weird coming from a non-political background to see members of Congress in the U.S. Capitol wearing foreign flags on their lapels?
I was shocked when the Ukraine and Russia war started, or if you want to call it a war. I don't call it a war. I call it's a funded war. As a matter of fact, Washington, our country, is propping up Ukraine. We give them $1 billion every single month. That doesn't have anything to do with war. That pays for their government. That pays their salaries. That pays their retirements. That pays to fund their entire government. So we have Ukraine. I call it the 51st state, because Washington loves Ukraine so much. They just love Zelensky and love Ukraine. But when that started, and then all of a sudden, and I wasn't for it, I was like, why are we doing this? This doesn't make any sense. We have so many problems at home, and people in my district are suffering. People have lost their businesses. They can't pay their rent. Senior citizens can't, they're choosing between food and medicine. Our border is overrun, and people are dying every single day. But all of a sudden, every Republican that I knew, barely knew, by the way, they're all of a sudden carrying Ukraine flags in their little, front pockets. They had to have those. They had to have the pins. I stand with Ukraine, and it's everywhere. It was as if I was in a foreign country. It didn't make any sense to me.
But I mean, the irony was just so stark. Like, our borders open, we are being invaded, but we're paying tens of billions of dollars to secure Ukraine's borders. Mm-hmm. And if there's any group that should be alive to that, it's Republicans, and they should be defending America's borders. But I don't think any of them were.
But actually, let's talk about Congress as a whole. The United States of America's Congress should be solely focused on our problems. And why does it? I would argue that both parties should not be just completely sold out to Ukraine. Ukraine's not even a member of NATO. Not even a member of NATO. Here was
we have no treaty obligations to Ukraine.
Yeah, and the shocking conversations I had was the first vote to fund them. I was sitting there, Marjorie, you're voting yes for this, right? I'm like, no, I'm not voting yes for this. Why are you voting yes for this? And so all of these conversations I started having with the other conservatives, America First Republicans, blew my mind. You have to vote for this. You'll lose your reelection. Marjorie, how can you can't
Because
vote?
the people of your district care so much about Zelensky? Is that why?
Oh yeah, I mean they say it all the time. Every time I see him at the grocery store, like, "Oh, please help Zelensky." He wears cute green T-shirts all the time. The man can't wear a suit and tie anymore.
But other supposedly conservative Republicans said this to your face.
America first. The ones running for re-election, pro-Trump, pro-America, pro-secure borders, MAGA, 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 all this stuff. You have to vote for. You don't want to vote. You don't want to help Putin, do you? Are you for Putin? Are you for Russia? Yeah.
It's just so nauseating.
It's disgusting.
How do you keep working there?
I think I keep working there because I'm so pissed off. And I really don't care if I'm friends with these people or not. I go to D.C. every week when we're in session. I know they don't like me, and I could care less because I just feel like I have to push and shove every issue that is for our country and for our people front and center in any way I possibly can and embarrass the hell out of them if they do not support our country and our people.
I should say, by the way, it's not just, I'm focused on Republicans because I think a lot of people watching this have voted for them with a false expectation that someone cared about them or would protect them.
Yeah, that they mean it, maybe.
But the Democrats, pardon my stupid glasses, but the Democrats, not fans. And this is from the back of your book. This woman should be on a watch list, not in Congress, says Hillary Clinton. She must be expelled, says Ocasio-Cortez. MTG is a cause for trauma and fear among members of Congress, says Pelosi. This woman gets to come and talk about taking over the country, and she's not behind bars. How does that work, says Whoopi Goldberg?
Yeah, they're trying.
They'd kill you if they could.
Absolutely. They would kill me. They'd kill you, too. They'd kill many of us.
What do you think that's about?
They hate us.
Why?
Think about Hillary Clinton. What did she call us all? Deplorables. They come from some sort of elite class, at least in their own minds, where they look down on all of us as if we're some subclass of people in the country. We're so annoying to them. We aren't educated enough for them. We aren't good enough for them. We won't support their never-ending causes for wars or whatever the next thing is, or supporting gender change for children as if that's ever the right thing to do. Or why can't every woman just have an abortion? It should be a rite of passage. That's who these people are. And they hate any of us that stand up and say, you people are flat out evil. Because they are. They're evil.
Yeah, I've noticed. Tell us what you think of the new Republican Speaker of the House.
It's early in his speakership. Let's be very honest. This is nothing he ever planned for.
Yep.
Was not prepared for, had no base staff ready for this.
Yes.
It's literally something he luckily got thrown into.
Yep.
Thrown in a hot frying pan. Being the Speaker of the House is one of the hardest jobs in the country. It really is. People think it's like some sort of position that they stand up there with a gavel and bang it up and down.
No.
That's not what it is. This is a CEO position of one of the most powerful companies, so to speak, in the world, or the most powerful one. They control the checkbook of the American people. They control the votes that happen on the House floor that drive the agenda of the federal government. They control whether we go to war or not, whether or not our sons and daughters in the military live or die. Being the Speaker of the House is a serious job, and it takes extremely serious-minded people. And I was extremely disappointed when the first thing our new Speaker, Mike Johnson, does as a conservative is he brings a continuing resolution to the floor, completely clean, that just completely funds Joe Biden and his administration's budget that Nancy Pelosi created and passed during my first term, which I hated, absolutely hated. I hated Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. I hated the bills that she put. I hate the budget. I think it's disgusting. It's filled with utter horrible things. And he passed that clean, like that.
Why?
I think, and of course, anybody can judge from the outside, but as soon as anyone gets thrown into Speaker of the House, everyone descends on them because they need something from that person. They need them to buy in. They need them to believe the lies that you're told in the classified briefings, especially in the Situation Room, especially by people like Jake Sullivan. I think he felt impressed to get those phone calls, felt important to be in those rooms, in those conversations. Yeah. And I think I'm not sure what we're going to see, but the first things he was talking about was funding Ukraine and funding Israel.
Those are the first things.
And a continuing resolution. So 3 things. First thing he talked about first week of Speaker, continuing resolution of Joe Biden's budget clean, not getting anything for it. Funding, continuing the Ukraine war, even though it's the most unpopular thing in the country and everybody's fed up with it and angry that another penny would be even talked about going over there. And then talking about funding a war in Israel and Gaza, and Israel's handling the whole problem themselves. So why do we even need to be involved? So this is.
So if you take 3 steps back, I mean, the big things that government does, immigration, border, right? Because it controls what your population is, spending and your debt, budget, and war. And he basically bought in day one to the priorities of the Democratic administration, it sounds like.
100%.
So, like, how could that happen?
That's what I said. But you know what? You're not dare to criticize. Criticizing is not a popular thing to do. And apparently I'm the only one doing it right now.
It doesn't sound personal. It doesn't sound like you hate the guy personally.
No, he's a nice guy.
He sure is.
He's a Christian man. He's a good man. He's a husband. He's a father. All of those are wonderful things.
But if your first act is to continue to fund the Ukraine war, then you're not for the United States.
Well, at this time, he hasn't done it yet, but that is what he's talking about.
I keep hearing that he's very, and from people who've talked to him, that he's very enthusiastic about it. So that suggests that he's like on another planet and not capable of governing.
Well, he is saying that if he pairs it with our border, Ukraine funding for getting wins for our border, that's somehow going to be palatable to the American people. And I'm going to argue right now, I'll fight it as hard as I can because I will be repulsed. I will be insulted that funding a war in Ukraine that continues just killing people just because because Washington wants to do that and it lines the pocket of people, just keep making them rich in the military industrial complex and continue getting rid of our reserves. If that is somehow on the same level as our border security, that would be the biggest insult that you could ever throw in the American people's face.
It sure sounds that way. So you sort of wonder, like, how long can this continue? You have one party that's destroying the country at high speed and another party that's helping them do it. And then the majority of the population, to one degree or another, is not on board with this. Right. So that sounds like pre-revolutionary to me. Like, that can't continue forever, can it?
It should. The American people should not tolerate it. No, they seriously should not tolerate it at all. Because here's Washington, D.C. So here's our government. We're over $33 trillion in debt. Our government must hate us, must truly hate the American people to do that to Americans. Our border is wide open. That's not just Joe Biden, everybody. That is the Democrat Party.
Yes.
Every single one of them are solidly on board with that. We have crime erupting all over the country. Innocent people are dying every day because the crime is so bad. And the economy is being driven off a cliff with the Green New Deal. It's the biggest thing looming in policy. And it's already in place. It's just at the start. No one has suffered the consequences yet. Here's why I hate Republicans right now. They don't do a damn thing to stop it, Tucker. They campaign on it every single cycle. They talk about it. They go on the news and say all these wonderful sounding things to their voters and their donors. They do their committee hearing 5-minute clips and post it all over social media. And then they send red meat fundraising emails. And no one does a damn thing to stop the agenda that is literally killing Americans every day. Oh, I introduced articles of impeachment on Christopher Wray, Merrick Garland, Matthew Graves, the son of a bitch that attacks these January 6th defendants day in and day out, who is horrible, doesn't prosecute crime in D.C. He's a U.S. attorney. He has a jurisdiction to do both. Doesn't do crime in D.C., only does J6ers. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, I forced that to the floor recently. 8 Republicans voted with the Democrats to protect them. 3 of them were chairmen of powerful committees. And Joe Biden, multiple times. But Republicans don't have the courage or the guts, or maybe they don't want to impeach any of these people.
They clearly don't. So you're on a roll, and I don't want to slow you down. But I do want to bring out of you, who's doing this? Like, can you just name a couple? Because the way groups work usually is, the strong influence the weak. It only takes a couple of people with a strong point of view to convince everyone else to follow them.
Yeah.
So there are clearly some Republicans, Mike Rogers is obviously one of them, but powerful Republicans in the House were convincing everyone else that these anti-American positions are the right ones.
Mm-hmm.
Who else would they
So
be?
Mike Turner,
Mike
chairman.
Turner
Yep.
of Ohio.
Yes, chairman of Foreign Affairs. No, he's Intel. I'm sorry, chairman of Intel.
He's the one who's trying to hide the UFO disclosures.
Is he?
I think so, yeah.
Probably, yeah. Among many other things. He also wants to renew the FISA program. Patrick McHenry, another chairman, I'm not sure which committee he is. Virginia Fox, chairman of Ed and Workforce. 4 Republicans on the Judiciary Committee, which is where impeachment takes place.
Yes.
4 of them. Ken Buck, of course, we don't expect anything different from him. Darrell Issa, former chairman of the Oversight Committee from California, said that I lack maturity for trying to impeach Mayorkas. Imagine that. Multiple
Darrell
other
Issa from
members.
San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, California's been totally destroyed by immigration. I don't think there's any, by every measure.
Who can argue
every
that?
measure, right?
Right.
I watched it happen. How could Darrell Issa support this?
He says that articles of impeachment should go through a process through committee. But my articles of impeachment on Mayorkas were sitting in the Judiciary
No,
Committee.
he's defending the invasion of the country. Why would he do that?
Of course, because he claims that articles of impeachment should go through a committee process. But my articles of impeachment had been sitting there for 6 months on a shelf collecting dust. And they weren't interested in doing the process that they are the ones that can do it in judiciary.
Yeah.
No one wanted to lift a finger. They don't want to impeach anyone.
Do you have any allies?
Not many. Not many. There's some. It depends on the issue. Sometimes there's Republicans that I do ally with. A lot of us have conservatives. We have similar voting records, but I feel like I don't have enough that are willing to go all the way, truly go all the way and do what the American people want. If you talk to regular people, they want to impeach everyone because in the real world, people get fired. They're like, impeach them all. They all suck.
Yes.
Right?
What do you think we didn't do one word on it, but the speaker's drama, you got completely caught up in that
Mm-hmm.
without getting into all the details, which are probably not that interesting at this point, but what did you learn from that?
So a lot of people were confused why I would support Kevin McCarthy. And I can understand why they were confused about that because I spent well over a year when I first came into Congress attacking him.
Right.
I even called him feckless on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like I attacked him constantly. But then when time went on and I found out no one else is running to be speaker, no one else wants this job. Kevin McCarthy really wants it. He's raising record amount of dollars for Republicans. I put my professional business experience to work and went, this is the person I have to work with. He's going to be Speaker of the House. Steve Scalise didn't want the job. Jim Jordan didn't want the job. Nobody wanted the job. So I come from a professional background in business where we work with people in order to accomplish things. And I had very serious things I want to accomplish. I want to stop funding these foreign wars. We need to defend and secure our border. There's many things I want to work on. I want to protect kids. No child should be cutting their breast off, being castrated, or doing these horrible surgeries and hormone therapies. These are things I care about. And in order to get them done in Washington, you have to work with leadership. So in good faith, that's what I did. I supported Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, developed a working relationship with him, and said, this is the process I have to pursue to do it. I got some things done. I have to say, I'm proud of it. I got an impeachment inquiry passed without a floor vote because I convinced him, announce it. This is something you can do as Speaker, announce an impeachment inquiry. Nancy Pelosi did it. Why can't we do these things? And he did it.
Yeah.
And then I got the Ukraine money taken out of the defense bill. That was a huge win. And I did that because I convinced him and convinced Congress, this is not popular. Your voters, your donors do not support this war.
Yes.
Unless the only donors you care about are the ones that support the military-industrial complex.
Well, it does seem like those donors, I read a piece today in Business Insider, which I don't typically read, I know, that said that Republican donors are widely convinced that Nikki Haley, who is like the most anti-American person to run for president on the Republican side in my memory, she's going to beat Trump. And she's the one. And leaving aside just how almost unbelievably, supernaturally horrible she is, she's trailing him by 50 points. So my question to you is, are Republican voters donors rather, that dumb and out of touch? Or is this some sort of complex PR play, or what is that?
Is the election rigged? I mean, that's where my mind goes.
Well,
Why
yeah.
would rich, powerful people choose to donate to a losing candidate unless there's something that they know that we don't know?
Well, that's a great question that
I'm
I
just
had not considered.
Most rich, powerful people are good with their money, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they usually invest in things that make them money, or they invest in relationships that they can build on, right? And you would think if you're looking at the primary numbers and President Trump is blowing everyone out of the water, but you're also looking at this and the lead candidate, Trump, is being just politically persecuted by every justice system in the country. And maybe there's something that they know that we don't know. And so they're throwing all their money and support behind Nikki Haley because if she loses, they're going to have to go back to Trump. That doesn't make sense to me.
This is a pretty good Rorschach test, I think, for Congress. Like, secretly, how many of your Republican colleagues like Nikki Haley, do you think?
Oh, they probably love her. Ralph Norman, he endorsed her.
Nikki Haley.
Yeah, from South Carolina. He's on the board of the Freedom Caucus. Yep.
So he's calls himself conservative, but he's for Nikki Haley.
He's all for Nikki Haley. Publicly.
Who thinks our borders are irrelevant and should remain open, but the borders of foreign countries deserve our children to die.
America First conservative Ralph Norman is all in for Nikki Haley.
So
he loves war.
You think it's fair to say that Nikki Haley's views represent a lot of Republicans in Congress?
Members of Congress, probably. Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah.
But what about Republican primary voters?
Absolutely not. She does not represent Republican primary voters. Not at all.
I want to go back to the earlier question about just the low-hanging fruit and the easy ones. Derek Chauvin, the cop in Minneapolis who was convicted of murdering George Floyd. Now we know he didn't murder George Floyd. Medical examiner said there's no evidence that George Floyd was strangled. He died of a fentanyl overdose, died of a drug OD.
Yep.
But Derek Chauvin is in prison. He was just stabbed in prison. Spend the rest of his life probably in prison. That's a moral atrocity. Now that we know the truth. Why is no one in Congress stepping up for this man?
Well, it's very unpopular to talk about it. So
Why?
Obviously, Tucker, I'm going to talk about it.
Well, good.
Yeah, I think I do believe this is one of the biggest injustices happening in our country today. I believe it's an attack on him because he's white and he's male.
Obviously.
I believe that it's political and they have to crucify him because he was a police officer. He had a great record. He did nothing wrong, and he is white and male and Christian. So they have to make an example of him because that is the type of person in America and arguably the entire world they want to kill. They want to destroy that identity. And it's the most dangerous thing happening, and our children are suffering for it. The younger generations of white men who are good, who would want to be in the military, who want to be a police officer when they grow up, want to be a fireman, want to be these ideal male, masculine things when they grow up, are being taught a lesson by look at what happens to Derek Chauvin. And they are probably going to kill him in jail when actually the right thing to do is to release him out of jail because he never did anything wrong in the first place.
But what I don't understand is now that it's not a close call because in a court filing, we discover that the medical examiner who did the autopsy said, the medical examiner, not a cable news pundit, this guy was not strangled. He did not die of asphyxiation. He died of a drug OD.
Drug overdose.
So we know the facts.
Right, a
which I guess
fentanyl.
we didn't know before. We pretended we didn't know. So how can every pro-cop Republican in the Congress not stand up on this guy's behalf? Why is it controversial?
Over 300 Americans die every single day from fentanyl poisoning. That's what George Floyd, he's one of those deaths.
Yes, sad.
But yet, a political movement that was well-funded and supported by the entire Democrat Party, so much so that BLM's funding link was on Act Blue, the Democrat Party's website, official website. It was propped up by the entire powerful media industry in America. And then every Democrat donor all over the country donated to BLM and supported the Democrats for supporting BLM. And then they sacrificed a white male police officer. It had to be done because that's what their movement wants. That is exactly what they want. Look at what's happening today over in Sudan. There are thousands of people being slaughtered, millions of people maybe. We don't even know the numbers being slaughtered by Muslims. If Black Lives Matters, why isn't that group in the entire Democrat Party raging over supporting Black lives over in this foreign country? Because they love foreign war, don't they? I mean, it doesn't make sense. But yet in America, they obviously don't care at all about some other country in Africa where people are being killed because they don't care about Black lives. It's not about Black lives. It's not about any foreign war. It's only about certain foreign wars. And it's about certain movements that allows them to move the political needle and brainwash the masses to believe what they need them to believe. They sacrificed Derek Chauvin because he's white and he's male, and they want to kill off a whole generation of white men. They don't want them to be police officers. They don't want them to join the military. They don't want them to be strong figures in their family or husbands or fathers.
Well, they say all that, so that's not, you're not guessing. We need more diversity in our police. We need fewer white men in our police department. That's what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So your assessment is not crackpot. It's taking their words and repeating them. So you've just, in about as blunt terms as anyone could muster, displayed your contempt for a lot of your colleagues in the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. I'm angry at them.
Obviously, you're not going to become a Democrat because they're the mirror image of
Satan.
What you were. So where does that leave you, and what do you do going forward?
I ran for Congress in the beginning to push the Republican Party to actually support Americans and America and do the things that they always promise and tell us to do. Going forward, that's all I care about. It's all I've cared about from the beginning is, oh, you want to say this on television? Well, do it. I don't care about words. Words mean nothing to me. Action is everything. And our country is on fire. We don't have a border. It's ridiculous to even say we have one. It's overrun and controlled by the cartels mostly. The Border Patrol agents are the welcoming committee to over 160 countries all over the world. They welcome in terrorists. They welcome in criminals, mentally insane people, child trafficking, human trafficking, drugs. They're forced to welcome them in. It's not because they're bad people. They're wonderful people. The government makes them do their job that way. So think about what we have to force Republicans in Congress actually do what they said they're going to do. So I'm not there to be friends with them. I don't care about their stupid cocktail
I've noticed.
I want them to do their job.
You've been swatted repeatedly.
Yeah.
7
times.
7 times?
Mm-hmm. But they don't know who's doing it.
They just don't know.
No, can't figure that out.
Did the security cameras break? It's kind of like Epstein's cell.
They can unmask people like Carter Page and people like that, but they don't know who's swatting me, who's calling in.
7 times.
Mm-hmm.
Are you worried about your safety?
I just bought a lovely AR-15.
Really?
Another one. Yes, I'm very proud of it. It's pretty.
I hope it doesn't have more than a 10-round magazine, though, because you don't need that.
Oh, no. Yeah, I know I've got far more than that.
2 quick policy questions. One, will there be an effort to take people's guns away in our lifetimes, do you think?
Absolutely.
Do you think
yes.
that'll be successful?
Well, I look at Brazil. I just had a visit from Edward Bolsonaro and some of the members of Congress down there in Brazil, and they came to visit me because they are really afraid and they're concerned for their country. Since the Lula administration has taken over, many of them are afraid of losing their political rights, and the Lula administration is going after them and trying to take away their political rights to run for office. They're going after their journalists, their press. Many of them are fleeing the country because they're going to be locked up by the Lula administration. They want to take away their guns down there in Brazil. So I'm looking at that country and I'm saying, I think we're one election away from finding ourselves in the same situation in Brazil. And it's the saddest thing in the world to think that that's where we are in America, but yet so many people are asleep. And it's a tragedy because I'm angry at my own party in Washington because they're not doing enough to stop it. They're not doing anything to stop it. As a matter of fact, they're passing continuing resolutions and keeping it going. But I'm also looking at so many Americans because our American life is really good, Tucker. And it's easy to get lost in enjoying every day as an American. And gosh, God bless them, rightfully so. But it's easy to be lulled into this world where you're not paying attention to what's about to happen to us. So I'm a little bit worried about what may be about to happen to us.
Do you think we could wind up in a war with Iran?
Yes, absolutely. I think we could easily end up in a war with Iran.
What's the appetite for that among Republicans in the House, do you think?
They also have a strong appetite. I don't know. The ones I hear talk about, they'd rather fight China. I hear that
They're
more
going
than
to fight
Iran.
China.
Yeah,
Which
China.
makes all of our antibiotics. So how long is that war going to last? I mean, they make everything.
They do.
Obviously, we can't go to war with them because they control our country already, right?
Right. Didn't we learn that? COVID. I have a chapter about COVID, and it's like all the lessons we learned from COVID, you would have thought that one would have stuck.
Yeah.
Like maybe we would bring back the manufacturing to our country and at least make life-saving medicine. No, we got to depend on China.
But there are Republicans who want to go to war with China?
Yes. They're preparing for it. We have to build our military. We have to fund it. We have to build up our military because they say this. We are going to be at war with China within 5 years.
They say that out loud or they think that at night?
They say it out loud in our meetings.
We wouldn't win that war. I mean, that's insane.
Obviously. Well, I think that's rational thinking and speaking, but...
It's not an endorsement of China, by the
Nope,
way.
nope. You're not a China lover.
No.
Neither am I.
Tool of Xi Jinping. But they really say that, huh?
Yes, they say that out loud.
Do you ever hear anybody in the cloakroom? Is that the right place?
Cloakroom.
Cloakroom. Say, I really can't believe our country's being invaded by millions of people from the third world. Like, we need to kick them out immediately because America's for Americans. Does anyone ever say that?
They do say that, and then they don't impeach Secretary Mayorkas.
Oh.
Yeah. So they say it, yes. Like, can you believe the new numbers? Like, oh my goodness, October's numbers came out. Highest record of any month, any October on record. You guys want to impeach Mayorkas yet? Marjorie, you're not mature enough for that.
So are you going to stay in Congress?
Oh, yeah. I'm angry.
How do you raise so much money, by the way, if you give the finger to donors? You raise a ton of money.
I do, and it's because regular people donate to me. Just grassroots, small dollar donors. That is 90% of my donations, or well over 90%.
It's not Raytheon.
No, I don't have any money from Raytheon.
They don't give you anything?
Nope. No, I don't have any.
Big questions about artificial intelligence is, will we be able to stop it? Will it become autonomous and start bossing us around? In the meantime, how do you have a functioning democracy with a technology that's smarter than every human being? We spoke to Elon Musk about those questions. The remainder of our fascinating interview with him is next. The only advantage human beings have or have ever had is they're the smartest beings on the planet. But soon that will not be true. In fact, like next week. So when AI becomes stronger than we are, what do you do exactly? And what does it mean for democracy? We asked Elon Musk about contingency plans for dealing with advanced general intelligence. Here's part of that conversation. You've heard people say we should just blow up the server farms because there's no way to, once this gets rolling, there's no way to slow it down. What do you think of that?
Well, the really heavy-duty intelligence is not going to be distributed all over the place. It'll be in a limited number of server centers. If you say very sort of deep AI, heavy-duty AI, it's not going to be in your laptop or your phone. It's going to be in a situation where there's like 100,000 really powerful computers working together in a server center. So it's not like subtle, and there are a limited number of places where that can happen. In fact, you can just look at the heat signature from space, yeah. And it'll be very obvious. I'm not suggesting we go and blow up to server centers right now, but there may be some. It may be wise to have some sort of contingency plan where the government's got an ability to shut down power to these server centers. Like you don't have to blow it up; you can just cut the power.
And what would trip...
Or cut connectivity as well, that's another way.
Right,
yeah.
But what would trip that switch, do you think, in your mind? What would be the threshold that you'd have to pass to warrant the government cutting off your power or cutting off your signal?
Well, I mean, I guess if we lost control of some super AI, like for some reason, like the things that would normally work to do a passive shutdown, like the administrator passwords, if they somehow stop working, where we can't slow down or I'm not sure, I don't have a precise answer, but if there's something that we're concerned about, and are unable to stop it with software commands, then we probably want to have some kind of hardware off switch.
Yes.
I think can't hurt.
Have you talked to, since you know Larry
have one,
Page,
yeah.
and you obviously know the OpenAI guys because you started it.
Definitely have one.
Have you talked to the people who run the biggest AI companies about this recently?
I haven't talked to Larry Page in a few years because he got very upset with me about OpenAI. So when OpenAI was created, it did shift things into a from a unipolar world where Google and DeepMind controlled, like I said, 3/4 of all the AI talent, to where there's now sort of bipolar world, or OpenAI and Google DeepMind, and they're and now weirdly it seems OpenAI is maybe ahead. So I have had conversations with the OpenAI team and Sam Altman. I haven't talked to Larry Page because he doesn't want to talk to me anymore for a few years.
Can I ask you just about, since you've been around a lot of this, the thinking? So why would anyone not be a speciest, be human-centered in his thinking about technology? Like, what's the thinking there?
I think what he's trying to say is that, if I were to guess, that all consciousness should be treated equally, and whether that is digital or biological.
And you disagree?
I disagree, yeah. Especially if the digital consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, digital intelligence, decides to curtail the biological intelligence.
Right. So you're just building your own slave master, and why would you do that?
Doesn't sound great. Yeah, I mean, we should at least no need to rush. Like, what's the hurry? Where's the fire?
How? Tell us about the hurry. So I know you've been talking about this for years, and on the sort of the periphery of our attention, we've heard Elon Musk talking about AI. But for most people, it's been like 3 months since they've had any interaction with this at all. So what's the timeline here? At what point does it start to really change our society, do you think?
I think it starts to have probably an impact this year. GPT-4, now it's like writing poetry, and
pretty decent poetry, actually.
Pretty decent. Its skill at rhyming is incredible.
Yes, yes, and it's coherent.
Yes, it is. It's even got a narrative.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So you could say
that's hard to do.
Like, most humans can't do that.
That's true.
So it's already past the point of what most humans can do. Most humans cannot write as well as ChatGPT, and no human can write that well that fast, as to the best of my knowledge. So maybe Shakespeare.
How can you have a democracy with technology like that? I mean, if democracy is, government by the people, each person's vote is equal to every other person's vote. I mean, and people are choosing their votes freely. Can you have a democracy with this?
Well, that's why I raised the concern of AI being a significant influence in elections. And even if you say that AI doesn't have agency, well, it's very likely that people will use the AI as a tool in elections. And then, if the AI is smart enough, are they using the tool, or is the tool using them? So I think things are getting weird, and they're getting weird fast.
Things are getting weird, and they're getting weird fast, and not just in technology, but in banking. As someone who runs 3 of the world's most successful companies, Elon Musk knows a lot about banks. We couldn't resist asking him about what seems like a global banking crisis. His answers are next. In addition to having a lot of wise and prescient thoughts about artificial intelligence, Elon Musk is also one of the world's most successful businessmen. He runs Tesla and SpaceX and now Twitter. And we thought, wait a second, there seems to be an international banking crisis underway and a lot of inflation. Let's ask Elon Musk what he thinks of that. So we did, and here's what he said. So you've seen a couple regional bank collapses.
Yeah.
And we've been told that's not a big deal. that these are isolated and each one collapsed for unique reasons. It's not systemic in any sense. What's your sense of the stability of the American banking system?
Well, it's actually at this point a global banking system problem.
It is.
So we have a situation here where it's not that the canary in the coal mine has died, but the miners are starting to die too. So, Silicon Valley Bank collapsing overnight is one hell of a big canary. It's more like a turkey. I mean, it's not like some small fry thing. I think that there is a serious danger with the global banking system. There's a strong argument that if you were to actually mark to market the portfolios of the banks, the loans and whatnot, that the entire banking industry would have negative equity.
It feels that way.
Yes. So if you look at, say, commercial real estate, like offices and whatnot, the whole work from home thing has substantially reduced office usage in cities around the world. I think San Francisco's at 40% off. And San Francisco is like an extreme example, but I think it's on 40% vacancy. Even New York has. I think almost all cities at this point have record vacancies in commercial real estate. So now, the commercial real estate used to be something that was a grade A asset. If a bank had commercial real estate holdings, those would be considered the highest security, some of the safest, assets you could have. Now, that is not the case anymore. One company after another is canceling their leases or not renewing their leases, or if they go bankrupt, there's nothing for the bank who owns that real estate to go after, because they're previously strong company, now dead. What do you go after at that point? So we really haven't seen the commercial real estate shoe drop. That's more like an anvil, not a shoe. So the stuff we've seen thus far actually hasn't even. It's only slightly real estate portfolio degradation, but that will become a very serious thing later this year, in my view. I think if we see, which we're likely to see, a drop in house prices because the interest rates are too high, and for most people, when buying a house, they look at the monthly payment.
Of course.
If you're a 30-year mortgage, the vast majority of it is interest. So if the Fed rate is high, you have a high base interest rate. Effectively, the price you can pay for the house drops because you now have to pay more interest, which means that if you've got a fixed monthly payment, you can now afford to buy a house for less money. It effectively drops the prices of houses.
Yes.
This is the kind of thing that tends to accelerate, so that then you can get negative equity in the home market as well. And so if banks end up having loan losses in both their commercial and, well, they're definitely going to have loan losses in their commercial portfolio, but also in their mortgage portfolio, this is a dire situation. There is a solution to mitigate the magnitude of the damage here, which is for the Fed to lower the rate. But they raised the rate again. Now, if I recall correctly, which important caveat, I think the last time the Fed raised rates going into a recession was 1929.
What happened next?
Yeah, the Great Depression.
The concern, I'm not telling you nothing you don't know, but the concern is if the Fed drops rates again, then inflation will accelerate, and you can't do that in an election year.
So inflation is going to happen no matter what.
Huh.
If you increase the money supply, you get inflation.
Right.
So there's not some magical cure for getting rid of inflation, except to increase the productivity, the output of goods and services. So you say like what is money? You've got these sort of it's basically numbers in a database that sum up to some total. Then you've got the output of goods and services of the economy, and as long as the ratio of money to ratio of goods and services stays, if that stays constant, you have no inflation. If you add more money, if you add money to the system faster than you increase goods and services,
right,
then you have inflation. So all of these COVID sort of stimulus bills were not paid for. They just generated more currency, more money was created because the federal government, the checks always pass, unless you hit a debt limit, which there's probably going to be some debt limit crisis later this year. But provided you haven't hit the debt limit, the federal government, unlike state governments or city governments or individuals, can simply issue more money, and that's what they did. I mean, as the old saying goes, there's no free lunch. So if you could just issue massive amounts of money without negative consequences, why don't we just take that to the limit, make everyone a trillionaire? Well, they tried that in Venezuela. How'd that work out?
Well, they had to eat zoo animals.
Right. It's not good. There's no free lunch. There's not some ability to issue money and not have inflation.
Many of those kind of.
Now you can see why they vilify him. It'd be nice to have leaders have that smart. Elon Musk has spent a lot of his life staring off into space. Now he's got the world's biggest rocket company. Has he seen anything out there? We asked him. So Elon Musk has spent a lot of his life thinking about space, and he's got the world's biggest rocket company. So we asked him, have you ever seen anything out there that suggests alien life? And by the way, how do you think life on this planet is going? Elon Musk has been one of the rare voices to raise the alarm about lower birth rates. He's doing something about it personally. He thinks the rest of us should too. Here's this part of the conversation.
People sometimes take the fact that we're here on Earth for granted, and that there's consciousness is just a normal thing that happens. But to the best of my knowledge, we see no evidence of conscious life anywhere in the universe. So it might be there. In physics, they call it sort of the Fermi paradox. After when Enrico Fermi, was an amazing physicist, asked the fundamental question: where are the aliens?
Yeah.
A lot of people ask me, where are the aliens? And I think if anyone would know about aliens on Earth, it would probably be me.
I would think.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with space stuff. And I've seen no evidence of aliens. So I would immediately tweet it out. This says split second. That would be like one of the all-time, probably the top tweet of all time. I found one, guys. It's a jackpot. This is some 8 billion likes. Next level jackpot if you find the aliens. I don't think they're keeping this under. And it was like some. General, I think in the 60s, who they said show us the aliens, like Area 51, etc. And he said listen, we're constantly trying to get the defense budget to expand, and you know what would really get no arguments from anyone if we pulled out an alien and said we need money to protect ourselves from these guys. How much money do you want? You got it. They look dangerous. So the fastest way to get a defense budget increase would be to pull out an alien. We're like, yeah. I mean, there could be the invasion fleet. It could be arriving any minute. Who knows? So. So I digress, but
you were saying that our consciousness makes us unique in the universe as far as we know, and that we take
yes, I'm not saying that we are unique. I'm simply stating, to the best of my knowledge, that there is no evidence for other conscious life. I hope there is, and I hope they're peaceful. Obviously, two important characteristics. But I'm just saying we haven't seen anything yet. So. Yeah.
But you think that we take our existence here for granted?
Yeah, I think
there are threats to it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I just think we should not assume that civilization is robust. And if you look at the history of civilizations, the rise and fall of the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Sumerians, Rome. You know, there's throughout the world there've been the rise and fall of many civilizations. So there's an arc. There's sort of a life cycle arc to civilizations, just as there is to individual humans.
Yes.
And I think we just want to make sure that you know, we have civilization go onward and upward. That's, for example, why I'm concerned about decreasing birth rates and the fact that, for example, Japan had twice as many deaths last year as births. So that's they're a leading indicator. This is.
Can I say, and you've written and talked a lot about this, but can I just ask you to pause just for a parenthetical note? Why is that? I mean, the urge to have sex and to procreate is, after breathing and eating, the most basic urge.
Yeah.
How has it been subverted?
Well, it's just in the past we could rely upon you know, simple limbic system rewards
Yes.
in order to procreate. But once you have birth control and you know abortions and whatnot, now you can still satisfy the limbic instinct but not procreate. So we haven't yet evolved to deal with that, because this is all fairly recent, you know, the last 50 years or so, for birth control. You know, so I'm sort of worried that, hey, civilization, you know, if we don't make enough people to at least sustain our numbers, perhaps increase a little bit, then civilization is going to crumble. There's the old question of like, will civilization end with a bang or a whimper? Well, it's currently trying to end with a whimper in adult diapers.
Yes.
Which is depressing as hell.
The most depressing.
I mean, seriously, yeah.
War is less depressing.
Yeah, I'd rather go out with a bang.
Yeah, and with your shoes on.
Yeah,
Not with your
more
diaper on.
exciting.
Yeah. Whatever you think of Elon Musk, he's one of the rare figures in this country, maybe around the world, who sticks to the fundamentals. How do we keep the human race going? What's good for humanity and what's bad? Those are the questions our leaders should be discussing, and instead they're lecturing us about trans rights and systemic racism. So it's refreshing to hear it. If you'd like to hear the entire thing, the full uninterrupted interview, every minute our cameras were on, with Elon Musk, that's coming soon. It's going up on Fox Nation tomorrow morning, and we highly recommend it. So the latest campaign spending disclosures are in, and we can report with great confidence that Congressman Eric Swalwell is having a great time. Party time with Eric Swalwell. Up next. Think of the U.S. Congress as a jobs program. On the other hand, what would Eric Swalwell be doing without it? Well, he'd be slinging drinks at a Fuddruckers at a strip mall. He'd be grateful for the gig. But he's in Congress, whose life is very different. When he's not shagging Chinese spies, he gets to travel all over the world at his donor's expense. Thanks to our campaign finance laws, Swalwell gets to live like a minor celebrity with a security detail that carries guns his voters aren't allowed to carry. And if he wants to, he could hang out on the beach in a Hawaiian shirt with an umbrella drink, gold chains, and a chest wig. He could head off to the Middle East to get more free camel rides. He could do a lot of things. What has he been doing? Chadwick Moore has reviewed the latest Swalwell financial disclosures. He's with Spectator USA. He joins us tonight. Eric Swalwell, party time. How are you doing, Chadwick? What are you doing as well as as Eric Swalwell has been doing?
Oh, man, I wish that I was. It's Spring Break with Eric Swalwell, brought to you by Bud Light and the CCP, it appears to be. So we were looking at some of these campaign expenditures. And the campaign has spent, check out my numbers right, $11,000 on hotels in Miami Beach, where it's always ski season, if you know what I mean. They also ended up spending $8,000 on hotels in Times Square, New York, where there's a lot of Chinese massage parlors in that area. Don't know why I
Good point.
mentioned that. Just off the top of my head, they also spent $6,000 in West Hollywood, California, where perhaps they took in a drag queen brunch or two. It's like the Selma,
Yes.
Alabama of the drag queen civil rights movement over there. And finally, we know they spent nearly $10,000 in Las Vegas, where surprisingly they did not stay at the Mandarin. And while we're unsure what the Swalwell campaign was doing in Las Vegas, we can speculate maybe he was auditioning to be the mascot of Circus Circus, or perhaps holding a boycott of Texas Hold'em. either way, I think it's safe to say that blowing $10,000 in Las Vegas is a lot better for the country than sending it to Ukraine, for example.
I think that's right. But you just got to think, is he grateful? I mean, you can imagine him as your over-talkative waiter on a cruise ship without Congress. But now he's got like a necktie on, he's having weird sex with Chinese spies, and he's going to Vegas. Like, this is a massive upgrade for the man.
I know, what a life this guy has, and the donors don't seem to be bothered at all. Why would they be? I mean, they come to expect it at this point. But you know what? If your whole party platform is basically changing the weather and uplifting every minority in the country and everything else they want to do, it's going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of time, and those are going to be really, really high hotel bills. So he's perfectly in line. I don't think that they're too upset with him. They keep giving him money to do these things.
Party time with Eric Swalwell. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, sometimes you wonder just how filthy and dishonest our news media are. You'll be in the shower and you'll think they're bad, but how bad are they? Well, here's one measure of their badness. You can try this at home. Ask yourself, is any news organization you know of so corrupt that it's willing to hurt you on behalf of its biggest advertisers? Anyone who do that is obviously Pablo Escobar level corrupt and should not be trusted. What would that look like? That level of corruption. Well, imagine that the Trump administration had made it mandatory for American citizens to buy MyPillow. That's one of Fox News' biggest advertisers. Imagine the administration declared that if you didn't rush out and buy at least one MyPillow and then at least another booster pillow, you would not be allowed to eat out. You couldn't re-enter your own country. You couldn't have a paying job. MyPillow, they told you with a straight face, was the very linchpin of our country's public health system. Now imagine as they told you that Fox, as a news organization, endorsed it, amplified the government's message. Imagine if Fox News attacked anyone who refused to buy MyPillow as an ally of Russia, as an enemy of science. And then imagine that Fox kept up those libelous attacks even as evidence mounted that MyPillow caused heart attacks, fertility problems, and death. If Fox News did that, what would you think of Fox News? Would you trust us? Of course you wouldn't. You would know that we were liars. Thank heaven Fox News never did anything like that, but the other channels did. The other channels took hundreds of millions of dollars from big pharma companies, and then they shilled for their sketchy products on the air. And as they did that, they maligned anyone who was skeptical of those products. At the very least, this was a moral crime. It was disgusting. But it was universal. It happened across the American news media. They all did it. So at this point, the question isn't who in public life is corrupt, too many to count. The question is, who is telling the truth? There are not many of those. One of them is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert Kennedy knew early that the COVID vaccines were both ineffective and potentially dangerous, and he said so in public to the extent he was allowed. Science has since proven Robert F. Kennedy Jr. right, unequivocally right. But Kennedy was not rewarded for this. He was vilified. He was censored because he dared to criticize their advertisers. The news media called Bobby Kennedy a Nazi, and then they attacked his family. But he kept doing it. He was not intimidated, and we were glad he wasn't. This is one of those moments when it's nice to have a truth teller around. It's helpful because suddenly the stakes are very high. Considering what's happening in Ukraine, a topic most of us don't know much about because the details are not reported. It was a year ago that every media outlet in the United States, from USA Today to the New York Times, told you it was a dangerous conspiracy theory to believe the U.S. government had ever funded secret biolabs in Ukraine. The idea was ridiculous. In fact, it was Russian disinformation. And then one day, in sworn testimony, Toria Nuland of the State Department accidentally admitted that it was true. Yes, she said, there are many secret biolabs in Ukraine. And, quote, we are now in fact quite concerned that Russian troops, Russian forces, may be seeking to gain control of them. Wait a second, you may be wondering. Why does the U.S. government maintain secret biolabs in a primitive country like Ukraine? Why not Austria? Why Ukraine? And why didn't we dismantle and remove these secret biolabs when the war with Russia started? Nobody ever explained that. This show was attacked for asking the question. Now we have learned that actually it is far worse than just biolabs. Not only has the Biden administration been maintaining these labs in Ukraine in the middle of a war, It also has, quote, sensitive nuclear technology in Ukraine as well. And no, we're not making that up. They admitted it today. Watch.
While Ukrainian staff are still operating the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, it does fall under the control of Russian armed forces and is currently being managed by Russia's state-owned nuclear energy firm Rosatom. So this is a significant concern, and essentially in this letter that has been reviewed by CNN, sent by the U.S. Department of Energy to Rosatom, the U.S. government has essentially warned Moscow not to touch the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant because of this sensitive American nuclear technology at the plant.
So many questions here, but we'll begin with the biggest one. What exactly is, quote, sensitive American nuclear technology? Sensitive American nuclear technology? Probably not to produce energy. No one in the media is going to ask that question. But if it's in the middle of Ukraine, in the middle of a war, it stands to reason this sensitive American nuclear technology has military applications. In other words, these are nuclear weapons. What else could they be? We'll stop speculating there. But take 3 steps back. This is all so crazy and so reckless, it is hard to believe it's happening. Here you have a Democratic president gone completely off the rails, completely, with existentially dangerous consequences, prosecuting a war that can only hurt the United States. A war with no upside. It is awful to watch. But it is not without precedent. Something similar happened 55 years ago in 1968, another remarkably turbulent and ugly year in American history that has many parallels to this. That spring, in March of 1968, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., the former Attorney General, the brother to the slain president, announced his candidacy against the incumbent, fellow Democrat Lyndon Johnson. And the overriding issue then, as now, was a pointless war then in progress. This is from Robert Kennedy Sr.'s announcement. To be clear, Robert F. Kennedy was not against all war on principle. He was against that war because he believed, with a lot of evidence, that it was not helping the United States in any way. But you weren't allowed to say that. He did. Party bosses hated him for that, but rank-and-file Democrats loved him. They put pictures of his face in their homes like icons. In the end, they named a football stadium after him in Washington. That was more than half a century ago. He was, of course, murdered in June of that year. But now Kennedy's son is embarking on a similar challenge to his own party and for similar reasons. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced today that he is running for president in the primary against Joe Biden. Here's part of what he said.
We were told initially that the objective was humanitarian. Many of the steps that we've taken in the Ukraine have seemed to indicate that our interest is in prolonging the war rather than shortening it. So if those are our objectives, to have regime change and exhaust the Russians, that is completely antithetical to a humanitarian mission.
That's supposed to be the face of extremism, but that's not extreme. It's rational and calm and well deliberated. Bobby Kennedy himself is not extreme. He is deeply insightful. And above all, he is honest, no matter what you think of the substance of what he says. Here, for example, is his recent analysis of the Biden administration's foreign policy. Big picture. Quote, "The collapse of U.S. influence over Saudi Arabia and the kingdom's new alliances with China and Iran are painful emblems of the abject failure of the neocon strategy of maintaining U.S. global hegemony with aggressive projections of military power. China has displaced the American empire by deftly projecting instead economic power. Over the past decade, our country has spent trillions bombing roads, ports, bridges, and airports. China has spent the equivalent building the same across the developing world. The Ukraine war is the final collapse of the neocon short-lived American century." End quote. Now, you may agree with that analysis, maybe you don't. Either way, if you're an honest person, you understand this is exactly the moment in our history when we need serious adult conversations about the world around us, a world that is changing to our detriment, and how we ought to respond to those changes. Bobby Kennedy would love to have those conversations. He's not running to get rich. He's running to make things better, but he's not allowed to have those conversations. He's been censored. Other media won't even talk to him. He criticized their advertisers. Here was the reaction on television today.
The anti-vaccine activist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has filed paperwork to run for president as a Democrat in 2024.
You see it on Fox News. You see it from Joe Rogan. You hear it from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. There are a lot of dangerous people out there who are not accepting the fact that these vaccines protect people from dying from COVID.
I've written for years about Robert Kennedy and other liberals who are absurd in their anti-vaccine, anti-science activities.
People like the Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s, the people with big platforms that are using them to be anti-mask and anti-vax.
He's extreme. He's dangerous, said one. Notice not there, not anywhere is a point-by-point rebuttal of his actual points. They never engage him on the facts. They can't. They would lose. Instead, they impugn his character. Now, that man they call dangerous is Joe Biden's leading primary opponent, and their view remains the same. Shut up, you're not allowed to talk. We disagree with that. We're not Democrats, but Bobby Kennedy is one of the most remarkable people we have ever met, and we are honored to have him on our show tonight. He joins us now. Bobby, thanks so much for coming on. So you are, of course, being dismissed as a vaccine nut, but watching your announcement today, it wasn't about pharma even so much as it was about America's place in the world and what do we do about it. If you wouldn't mind summarizing for our viewers where you think we are and what you think we ought to do.
Well, I gave a long speech, Tucker, and thank you again for having me on.
Of course.
And for that very kind of an introduction. You know, I think that the general theme of my speech was this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which is turning our country into a corporate kleptocracy, into a system of socialism for the rich, and this kind of a cushy socialism for the rich, and this kind of brutal, merciless capitalism for the poor. It keeps us in a state of war. It bails out banks at the same time that last month, the United States government told 30 million people it was cutting their their food stamp checks by 90%. It took 15 million people off of Medicare. The same month, it gave $300 million to the Silicon Valley Bank and tapped up the cost of the Ukraine war to $113 billion. We're sending $113 billion to the Ukraine. The entire budget of EPA is $12 billion. The budget of CDC is $11 billion. We have 57% of American citizens could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. A quarter of our citizens are hungry. So we're cutting welfare and food stamps by 90%. And we're bailing out the bankers. We're paying for a war that, we can't afford. And with the way that we do this is by printing money. We've printed 10 centuries of money in the last 14 years. And that caused the inflation, which raises food, which is a tax on the poor. So, we've raised food prices for basic foods like chicken, dairy, and milk by 76% in the last 2 years. And now we're cutting people's food stamps and bailing out banks the same month. It doesn't make any sense. And we need to get rid of this kind of corporate control of our government. It comes from our democracy is devolving into kind of a corporate plutocracy.
I would think that what you just said, and I'll just be honest, I agree with most of it. But even if I didn't, I would think, boy, that's a really interesting thing to say. You have a coherent worldview. You've written a lot of books on these topics. You've clearly thought about it. You're not in it for the money. So don't these issues deserve a wide hearing before the public entering a presidential year? It seems to me that they do.
I would think they would, and particularly the issues of war. And, my son went over and fought in the Ukraine, as I said today. I think people, the major doyens, sort of the most respected diplomatic gurus like Henry Kissinger and Jack Matlock and Larry Wilkinson have all said the Ukraine war is a huge problem for our country because from a geopolitical standpoint, it's driving the Russians close to the Chinese, which is the worst thing for us. But we're there for the right reasons because we have tremendous compassion for the Ukrainian people and the illegal invasion, the brutality, and also their valor and their courage. My own son was serving over there. He joined a special forces unit as a machine gunner. He fought in the Kharkiv offensive. Americans care about the underdog. They care about that kind of suffering. But the question is, why are we in the Ukraine? Because Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, said that we're there to exhaust the Russians. President Biden has said that we're there to deplatform, to depose Vladimir Putin. And if that's why we're there, and we're killing a lot of Ukrainians as pawns in a proxy war between two great powers. Here's one last thing I would say. Nobody talks about this. There's 14,000 Ukrainian civilians who have died, but 300,000 troops. The Russians are killing Ukrainians at a 7-to-1 to 8-to-1 ratio. They cannot sustain this. What we're being told about this war is just not true.
No, it's not true. And I would hope, despite the fact you criticize their advertisers, other media outlets would have enough respect for our country and for its voters to give what you said a hearing, because I think it's really important. And we're, again, grateful that you came on our show tonight. You're always welcome. Bobby Kennedy Jr., thank you.
Thank you very much, Tucker.
So it's been nearly 4 years since Jeffrey Epstein died. They told us he killed himself. Clearly he didn't. The government says it's still investigating his death. Really? After 4 years? How's the investigation going? So we called over to the Department of Justice today for an update, which we will bring you in just a moment. Plus, a pizza delivery driver is being praised for a heroic act caught on video. We're going to put him on video after the break. He joins us.
Oh, that's a high-speed chase. That's a high-speed chase.
So, castrate your children. That is the message. And some people, bewilderingly, are following that. There has been a huge surge of young people being castrated in the name of transgenderism. Reuters recently reported that in the past few years, 56 minors between the ages of 13 to 17 have undergone genital mutilation in clinics around the country. 776 minors have undergone mastectomies, having their breasts cut off. And more than 14,000 have been poisoned with hormone treatment, which will, in a lot of cases, sterilize them for life, cause them osteoporosis and other problems. So obviously, this is a very dark moment in our history. A civilized country would not put up with that. Hungary has a Child Protection Act which prevents any of this crap from going on, children from being sexualized. And because it has taken a stand against sexualizing children, Hungary is being sued by over a dozen EU member states. Balázs Orbán is the political director for Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, one of the smartest people we've ever talked about politics, and he joins us tonight. Balázs, thank you so much for coming on. So you are taking an unpopular position that I think will be vindicated by history. You personally will be vindicated by history, but right now it's got to be hard. Why are you sticking to your position in Hungary?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Tucker, for the nice words, and thank you for having me. Well, actually, the whole story started around 2021 when we in Hungary started to realize that something is coming. It's like a storm which is coming. Woke ideology or LGBTQ propaganda is arriving to Hungary, to schools, through media and through NGOs. And you know, you can imagine how a grassroots normal Hungarian citizen reacted on that. We don't have the word woke in Hungarian. People were asking, what are you talking about? Vogue, is that the French magazine or what? But then they started to realize that this is something serious. And when we introduced the Child Protection Bill, which bans transgenderism and the LGBTQ propaganda for minors, then the whole Brussels bureaucracy and European Union were going against us. Then we decided to turn towards the people, and we organized a national referendum when almost 4 million people said no to gender propaganda and said yes to child protection law. It's compared to the size of America, it would mean almost 130 million supportive votes. But then, as it happens, the empire strikes back, and the Brusselian deep state. It's very similar to the DC one. It's started a legal persecution against Hungary, which is backed by many Western European countries. Eastern European countries think differently, but there is an ongoing, really political and legal Cold War. But we try to keep the fronts up.
So it sounds like you're not going to back down.
No, definitely not. And
So
you know, the Hungarian people are behind us. So this is their expectation. This is, you know, my job is not to be popular among the Brusselian elites, but to represent the interest of my people in Brussels. This is why we have no other chance just to take the battle.
You anticipated my question, amazingly. I was going to ask, does the public support this? So just to be really clear in closing, a democracy is a government that represents the will of its people. You're often called a dictatorship, but this policy reflects what Hungarians want, just to be clear. Is that right?
True. True. This is what Hungarian wants. It's out of question. And if the media, the state, the big powers are against you, your only backing is the support of the people. We are very grateful for that, and we have to serve them.
Yeah. So if Samantha Power doesn't like it, you're a dictatorship, right? I got
yeah,
it. The terms have changed.
Oh, yeah. If you are not with us, then you are a dictatorship. This is how this foreign policy looks like. USAID immediately launched a Central European program. She visited our country, and they really are ready to enlighten us.
Yeah, I would keep her out of your country if I were you. Blaž Orban, coming from one of the last democracies in the West, Hungary, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you very much.
So as we told you earlier in the show, the Biden administration out of nowhere admitted that it has, and we're quoting, sensitive nuclear technology in Ukraine in the middle of a war. Does this even make sense? Are they referring to nuclear weapons? What else could it be, and why is it still in Ukraine? Joe Kent joins us after the break. One of those bizarre and apparently very significant news stories today that no one in Washington seemed to follow up on, and was presented as so many news stories are backward, Russia, Russia. But here's the actual point of the story. The Biden administration just admitted that there is, and we're quoting, American nuclear technology in Ukraine at a power plant. And apparently that plant has fallen under Russian control. So what exactly is this sensitive nuclear technology that belongs to the United States? Why wasn't it removed before the war? Does it have offensive capabilities? And isn't this all completely crazy and dangerous? Joe Kent is a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer. He is running for Congress from Washington State in the upcoming cycle. He joins us tonight. Joe, thanks so much for coming on. So no one is asking the obvious question, which is, what could this possibly be?
Yeah, exactly. And just how many more surprises are we going to get? How many more lies are going to come imploding in on us? We just found out last week that we actually have U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine. And now, oh, by the by, they're going to say, we also have, nuclear something here. They won't fully tell us what it is. Is it weapons? Is it a nuclear capability? But, of course, in true Biden fashion, they sent a strongly worded memo to the Russians to say, hey, don't touch this stuff. So we're supposed to believe that Putin is an existential threat to the entire world, but at the same time, he's reasonable enough to receive a memo from us and not touch our nuclear weapons. But, we've gone to war over countries having nuclear technology before. It ended up being a whole bunch of lies, but nukes have been used as a pretense before to get us deeper involved into a war. And we have U.S. boots on the ground. So we have this situation once again. For the last year, we've just seen escalation after escalation after escalation pushing us towards World War III. And at the same time, we have our elected officials who are not doing their job. Our congressmen and women are not doing their job by calling for a war powers resolution and getting some accountability here and actually letting the American people have their voice be heard. I don't think the American people are good with us going to World War III over what's happening right now in Ukraine when we have so many problems here at home.
So the headline here seems to be American nukes captured by Russians. Why is that not the headline? This war's been going on 14 months. If we had nuclear materials in Ukraine, why are they still there? This seems on many levels crazy, also negligent. Why is nobody reporting this?
Yeah, you know, the Biden administration definitely seems to operate at the confluence of hubris, malice, and then just absolute negligence. Like you said, there's this nuclear material here, and it's just there at the same time, like we have an actual shooting war going on. Why wasn't this discussed beforehand, and why wasn't there steps taken to actually go ahead and get this material out? And now we're just told that, hey, there's nuclear weapons there. We also have boots on the ground. Things aren't going as well as we're told. We just see lie after lie after lie. And what people really need to be wary of is we have the Pentagon saying that, hey, there's going to be all these new spring offensives. We're going to give the Ukrainians this weapon system or that weapon system. And these are the same generals, the same people that have lied to us for over 20 years that always said, hey, one more surge, one more tactic, and the global war on terror will turn the corner and we'll have peace in the Middle East. Well, that was a complete and total lie. And we're supposed to take their word right now that, hey, U.S. boots on the ground, along with nuclear material in the hands of the Russians, that this isn't a recipe for World War III. We're also supposed to completely and totally ignore that we're on the brink of destroying the U.S. economy because Russia and China are undermining our status as a prime reserve currency holder. All of this is happening right now, and Congress is doing absolutely nothing about it. This is a huge reason why I'm running for Congress again, Tucker, is to stay in the fight and then also to prevent us from going to World War III and to get our Congress to focus on the American people and to keep us out of these foolish wars overseas.
This is why Permanent Washington spent so much money and employed so many dirty tricks to beat you last time. You were their top priority to defeat. Joe Kent, we're, of course, rooting for you. Thanks for coming on tonight. We'll be right back.
Thank you so much, Tucker.
You will about elected Democrats, but they know where the power is. They're like truffle pigs for power. No matter how thick the forest is, they will find it. Here's one example. In his very first hours in office, literally on Inauguration Day, Joe Biden named a new head of the criminal division at the Justice Department. Now, Biden spent that same day, you will remember, lecturing the rest of us about equity, meaning that straight white men are bad. And yet, strangely, the person he chose for this job was not a member of a racial or sexual minority. He was instead a highly privileged, straight white guy. He was called Nick McQuaid. Nick McQuaid went to private schools. He rode at Wesleyan. He went to Columbia for law school. He was definitely not oppressed, but that did not matter to Joe Biden. Some jobs are too important for affirmative action. McQuaid's main qualification was being the former law partner of Hunter Biden's criminal attorney. In December of 2020, Hunter Biden hired a Latham & Watkins lawyer called Chris Clark to defend him against potential federal tax charges. Just a month later, Hunter Biden's dad hired Chris Clark's partner, Nick McQuaid, to oversee the agency that could bring those federal tax charges. That seems like an obvious and glaring conflict, but no, Nick McQuaid did not recuse himself from the Hunter Biden investigation. And so, more than 2 years later, not surprisingly, no charges have been brought against Hunter Biden. And it's not for lack of evidence. For years now, the FBI has had possession of Hunter Biden's laptop. On that laptop, as you know, is a detailed account of how the Biden family made millions of dollars from foreign governments selling access to the U.S. government through Joe Biden. So the question is, among many, did Hunter Biden pay federal taxes on all of that dough? What do you think? This is a guy who left a crack pipe and his driver's license in a rental car because he was too high to put them back into his pocket. Did he pay all his federal taxes? Let's just say Hunter Biden does not fit the profile of a faithful taxpayer. But he is the president's son. And that's why when he was asked about the criminal investigation into his taxes 2 years ago, he didn't seem that worried. Watch.
At the end of last year, Biden acknowledged an ongoing investigation by federal authorities for potential tax law violations. Is your legal team working on any kind of a plea deal?
Oh, no. I am absolutely certain that what we're doing is being completely cooperative with whoever is asking from any authority whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. The implication all through the campaign was that your efforts had somehow benefited your father financially. Have you ever given your father money from any of your business ventures?
No.
Nothing?
Nothing. Ever.
Not a nickel?
Not a nickel.
Directly or indirectly?
Directly or indirectly. Not a nickel ever. 100%. No. Never.
Oh, you lie. You lie. That was 2 years ago. Weirdly, we haven't heard a lot about the federal tax investigation into Hunter Biden since. And that is strange if you think about it, since we now have tens of thousands of new IRS agents to enforce tax law. And in fact, it wasn't that long ago that the Biden Justice Department, do you remember this? Indicted Donald Trump's 75-year-old accountant because he failed to declare the full value of his work vehicle. I think he was in handcuffs. But somehow these same enforcers of the law cannot be bothered to bring the Hunter Biden investigation to fruition, not when they have a laptop proving that he took millions from the government of China. How does that work exactly? Did he pay every dollar in federal taxes? Did he fully declare the value of his work vehicle or of his crack? What about the Russian hookers? By the way, at the same time, DOJ doesn't seem interested at all in the fact that Hunter Biden lied on a federal gun form. Go ahead and try that yourself at home. It's a felony. You'll go to jail. But Hunter Biden is not in jail. He's making art in his garden in L.A. Is what we're seeing what it looks like? Well, we can finally answer that question, thanks to a career special agent at the IRS who's decided to blow the whistle on the corruption in the Biden administration. This whistleblower has just informed Congress that he has proof that the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, lied under oath about the Hunter Biden investigation. That's a felony. So the Attorney General of the United States committed a felony, according to this whistleblower, who also says he has seen, quote, preferential treatment and politics improperly infecting decisions and protocols throughout the agency, and that these changes in standard protocol were designed to, quote, benefit the politically connected. So what we've learned here is exactly what you suspected all along. The Biden people are criminals. Watch.
My client wants to come forward to Congress. He's ready to be questioned about what he knows and what he experienced under the proper legal protections.
Attorney Mark Lytle's client is a supervisory special agent at the IRS who's prepared to tell Congress the investigation he's been working on has been hampered by what he thinks is special treatment.
Typical steps that a law enforcement investigator would take were compromised because of political considerations.
CBS News has learned the investigation the whistleblower worked on is about Hunter Biden. Lytle told us the whistleblower has been with the IRS for more than a decade and has extensive documentation to support his allegations.
The things he's been through are very well documented in emails and other communications with the Department of Justice,
including proof that our sleazeball Attorney General, whose presence in that job is an offense against the law and tradition of this country, lied under oath, a felony. So this is not a small story. Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about all of this today at the White House. Why is the Department of Justice sending working-class grandmothers to prison for walking around the Capitol, the People's House, while they bury criminal investigations into the president's son? Here was her non-response.
The president has always been clear during the campaign, during his presidency, that the Department of Justice should have independence. They should not be politicized, and they should be able to do their job independently, essentially. And so I'll leave it to them. I'll leave it to the Department of Justice to make their decision to move forward with this particular case.
Her presence is designed to insult the country, and it's working. But it won't last forever, because this is a real story. Miranda Devine, as always, is on it. She's with the New York Post, helped break the Hunter Biden laptop story in the first place, joins us tonight. Miranda, thanks so much for coming on. This doesn't seem like partisan rock throwing. This seems like an actual story to me. Is it?
Yes, and look, I think this might be the breakthrough story because really the cover-up of Biden corruption is like Watergate, now bigger than the original story. It involves the FBI, the CIA. Now you're seeing this quite honest, upright, completely non-partisan career IRS criminal investigator who has a lot of big scalps under his belt and is just treating the Hunter Biden story like he did any other case, is furious. He's been stymied. He sees that there's been political interference and obstruction in the case. And then I think what really set him off and made him go to the Inspector General of the Department of Justice and turn into a protected whistleblower was seeing a month ago Merrick Garland appear at an oversight hearing and give very misleading testimony. He was asked specifically by Chuck Grassley, is the US attorney in Delaware able to bring charges in California and in Washington, D.C.? Well, these are the two jurisdictions where Hunter Biden lived and should have paid taxes. And Merrick Garland assured Grassley, oh yes, David Weiss has every authority and power that he needs, and I'm backing him up, and this is all very independent. That is just the opposite of the truth. And really, if Merrick Garland doesn't know that, he's not doing his job properly.
If Merrick Garland can be shown to have lied under oath to the Congress, I mean, the Attorney General of the United States can't commit crimes. I mean, by definition, that's got to be the end of him as our Attorney General, I would think.
Well, it would be if you could ever prove it, but all of these people are clever. They have plausible deniability. They have layer upon layer in which they can pretend that they don't know what's happened. That's what Joe Biden's entire business model is all about. His relatives go and get the bribes, and he pretends he doesn't know about it.
That's such a smart point. Miranda Devine, thank you so much for that summary tonight. We'll be talking again, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, we should say, based on something Miranda just pointed out, for all the grouching we've done about the Republican Congress, it has been Chuck Grassley of Iowa and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, two Republican senators who have been on this story from the beginning. They're the ones who pushed the DOJ to answer the question, has Nick McQuaid recused himself from the Hunter Biden investigation? They never got an answer, so far as we know. So good for them. Well, as you've just heard, the Biden administration spends an awful lot of time covering up actual crimes committed by their political allies and their relatives. But for their critics, there is no such mercy. For the first time in our history, the government has begun to arrest people for saying things the White House doesn't like. That's the end of the First Amendment. Speech that's been protected for centuries in the United States is no longer protected. It's now a criminal act. We've told you about the grotesquely unconstitutional prosecution and then conviction of Douglas Mackey. The DOJ is trying to send Mackey to prison for a decade for making fun of Hillary Clinton's voters on Twitter. The media barely report the story. They don't seem to care at all. They seem to endorse it. No one in Congress has meaningfully pushed back against it. So this trend continues. The latest group of Americans to find their constitutionally protected opinions become felonies are, believe it or not, an organization of black nationalist left-wingers who oppose the war in Ukraine. The DOJ has just charged many in this group with seeking to, quote, sow discord, spread pro-Russia propaganda, and interfere in elections within the United States. Now, there's no evidence they interfered with any election. You're allowed to be pro-Russia. You're allowed to be pro-anything you want in the United States. Saying things the government doesn't like, having unfashionable opinions or opinions that are out of step with Joe Biden's opinions, that is not a crime. You can spread pro-Russia propaganda if you want to. You can spread anti-Russia propaganda if you want to. You can say whatever you want, but not anymore. According to the indictment, the criminals in question, quote, wrote articles that contained Russian propaganda and disinformation. Huh? They also gave speeches and posted videos that annoyed the State Department. Here's one of them.
There's a discussion about Russian military border buildup on its border with Ukraine, and how this represents a terrible threat to Ukraine by Russians. But there is no acknowledgement of the history that took us to this place, how the U.S. overthrew, participated in facilitating the overthrow of a government in Ukraine that was friendly to the Soviet Union. Nor does it talk about the history of this relationship between Ukraine and Russia. This is an ongoing aggression. It did not just start. It's been going on for a while, but the U.S. government relies on the ignorance of the people in this country and much of the world that's facilitated by people like Zuckerberg.
So, for whatever it's worth, we're not really sure who that guy is. We know he's American. Pretty sure that on a lot of issues, we likely would not agree with him. A lot of what he just said in that video seems to be true. But even if it weren't true, even if he was wrong, it would still be constitutionally protected speech. In a free country, which we had until recently, you are allowed by definition to have dumb opinions. Most of us do, but not anymore. So that man you just saw is facing 10 years behind bars for expressing views about Ukraine that the Biden administration doesn't want to hear. That's terrifying. Does no one else think that's terrifying? It is terrifying. And to that man's credit, whoever he is, he saw it coming. Here he is at a rally last month.
They have declared that black people are so stupid that it takes Russians to tell us that we are oppressed. I have never known a moment of black freedom for my entire life. I have never read of a moment since the beginning of a colonial mode of production where black people have been free. And yet they're saying that we are agents of some foreign power because we say black people must be free.
Okay, again, we're not defending that guy because we agree with all of his views. We probably don't. That is totally irrelevant. Whether you agree with what someone is saying has nothing to do with his right to say it. Americans are allowed to say what they think is true, period. If they take that right away, you are no longer a citizen, you are a slave. Glenn Greenwald is the host of System Update. He joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. I'm actually in some ways glad that they went after a group of people I probably don't agree with on a lot of things, because it just makes it so much clearer. This is not partisan. This guy is saying something the regime doesn't like, and they're trying to put him in jail. How is this happening in America?
I think one of the critical things to remember is even before January 6th, the Biden administration said their priority is to launch a domestic war on terror, to take all the tactics we used against al-Qaeda and ISIS and foreign terrorist groups and direct it inward, because they perceive that anti-establishment dissidents in America, like the person you just showed, are the real enemy. And that's what this is about. There's a foreign agents law that is supposed to be, if you say things you don't really believe because some foreign government is paying you millions of dollars to say them, you have to register. That's not the case with these people. These are people who have been radical black leftists for decades. They're not the people the Democratic Party likes. They hate the Biden administration. They're against the war in Ukraine. And they claim that they found $500 here, $2,000 there that have origins in the Russian government for events they did. This is what we criticize Russia for. We fund opposition groups in Russia, and then Russia says those are foreign agents. And we object and we say a foreign agent is only somebody saying things a foreign government tells them to say. And now we're using that same theory. We say Russia makes Russia tyrannical to criminalize dissent in the United States. That's what this case is about.
So what's so interesting about this is these are not MAGA people. These are the victims of systemic racism they're always lecturing us about, right? And their First Amendment rights have just been stripped, and they're looking at jail terms for having opinions Biden doesn't like. Where are the liberals? Where's Morning Joe? Where are all the sensitive white liberals to defend these people? They're not.
Well, this is why I'm so glad you're covering this case, Tucker, because this is the tactic that tyrants always use. When they want to implement an authoritarian precedent, they choose people that makes others uncomfortable. When they wanted to start banning people from the internet, they chose Milo Yiannopoulos and Alex Jones because they knew that even Republicans would say, I don't want to defend those people. They're a bridge too far. And then the precedent gets set and they expand it inward. Again, these are not people the kind of black radicals Democratic Party establishment representatives like. They're people who attack the Biden administration, who don't vote Democrat. These are real dissidents, and they know that not even Democrats will defend them.
No, they're not taking money from Apple and Facebook. They weren't in on the BLM scam. They actually mean it. Now you're making me like them. Glenn Greenwald, I appreciate your coming on tonight and getting, as you always do, to the core issues underneath it all. Thank you.
Great to be with you, Tucker. Thanks.
So Pete Buttigieg, a busy man, he's been fixing our racist roads. You just got to tear them up. When they're racist, you really just have to rip them out. But he's taking a break from that to address misogynist crash dummies. For real. More on that next. Well, Mayor Pete has run the Department of Transportation for about 2 years now. And the good news is we have fewer racist roads. They've been indicted by the Civil Rights Division. The bad news is we now have regular train derailments in which toxic chemicals spill into people's homes. Air travel is almost unusable, more unreliable than it's ever been. Just the other day, a major airline had to ground all of its flights. That happens a lot now. But Mayor Pete remains laser focused on the real problems, the ones that he's identified at McKinsey, the racist roads. but also the sexism inherent in our transportation system. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro of New Haven is on this. She praised Mayor Pete today for his efforts to root out sexism in the automobile industry, and she singled out a brand new initiative that she's hoping the Department of Transportation will roll out soon. Here it is.
You also plan to make important investments to address the roadway safety crisis, including the critical funding that would accelerate the development, and this is an area I've written to you about, of the use of female dummies in crash testing. This will start to fight the gender inequity among vehicle safety and crash victims.
So call us woke, but that seems like transphobia. Did it never occur to Congresswoman DeLauro you could just put lipstick on the male dummies and have them identify as female? Trans female dummies are trans females. Speaking of trans females, the Pentagon is all in on the propaganda, white rage, and now transgenderism. Military health providers at big bases, people who treat the children of service members, are coming out in favor of the sexual mutilation of kids. Army doctors at Travis Air Force Base in California and Walter Reed Military Medical Center recently wrote a piece in a medical journal saying that children should receive, quote, gender-affirming health care such as puberty suppression and affirming hormones. The doctors, air quotes are on doctors here, said kids as young as 7 can make their own medical decisions about sterilizing themselves for life. Tulsi Gabbard ran for president in 2020, served in the Congress from Hawaii, and of course continues to serve in the U.S. military. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Tucker, it's good to be.
This does seem, well, not only something we're going to be deeply ashamed of in 10 years, but also way out of the scope of the military's mission.
Completely. You know, when we look at what these DoD physicians are advocating for, it's just the latest of the taxpayer-funded mandatory woke education training programs that they now want to put in place across the entire DoD healthcare system, and saying that, hey, if there are any military members who have children who come and present themselves with gender dysphoria symptoms, as they say, they literally in that article, they say that the only pathway to treat these children is to immediately prescribe these hormones, these abusive hormones and procedures on these children, and often without even notifying the parents that this is going on. The good news in this is that there are about 50% of DoD-affiliated physicians who are saying, hey, look, I don't care what kind of training you give, we refuse to do this. We refuse to comply with this. The bad news is there are half of DoD-affiliated doctors who are just willing to go along with it.
Well, so
and this is what poses the risk to our kids.
You can use the VA. I beg your pardon. You can use the VA as a veteran.
Right.
Would you be comfortable getting medical care from someone who believed this?
I mean, for me, no. And I think a lot of parents within the military, my brothers and sisters in uniform, would also have very serious concerns. And that really goes to understanding this is not a done deal. This is not a hopeless cause. We need to take action and make sure that DoD and Congress does 3 very specific things. Number 1, stop this training. Tell the DoD, we're not going to give you a single penny unless you stop this training from occurring. Number 2, the DoD needs to get rid of these physicians who are essentially activists promoting this ideology within the DoD healthcare system. And number 3, for my brothers and sisters in uniform in the military who are very concerned about your children, as well as parents who are concerned about school health counselors and others, talk to your physician, talk to your pediatrician, talk to your school health counselor, make sure they're on the same page and that they're not one of these 50% who are just willing to go along this woke agenda that is being so abusive to our kids.
So rather than I've got a frog in my throat talking about this,
is a problem.
and I beg your pardon. But rather than just complaining about it, you have 3 solutions.
Exactly.
Defund the training.
Yes.
Get rid of people who are not obviously emotionally qualified to dispense medical care.
Yes.
These crazy doctors.
7 years old, Tucker. 7 years old, they're saying kids are equipped to make this decision for themselves.
To sterilize themselves for life. Right. That's insane.
Yeah.
Definition of, and then speak the truth.
Exactly.
Tulsi Gabbard, I am really grateful that you're brave enough to say that in public.
Thanks for having me,
at this
Tucker.
moment. Thank you.
It's good to see you
very much. Well, PETA is an animal rights organization. Of course, we don't agree with them on everything. A lot of things, probably. But they got an interesting take on the rat problem in New York. So Mayor Eric Adams says, just kill more rats. PETA says, wait a second, the rats are here for a reason, and the reason is you're dirty. And we thought that was a perspective might be worth hearing more about. A PETA spokesperson joins us next. Our season 3 of our documentary series, Tucker Carlson Originals, has premiered. The first episode is Let Them Eat Bugs. It's on Fox Nation right now. Banning meat in the name of climate change seems kind of far out, but in fact, the people running the world are well on their way to doing it, replacing your steak with bugs. Governments around the world are leading the charge on this. Here's what we found in the Netherlands, for example. Well, New York City has gotten a lot dirtier. It's not your imagination. The city's leadership is responsible for this, but they've decided to blame rodents for it. They've hired a rat czar and identified rat mitigation zones. Here's a local news report explaining it.
They're quick, dirty, disease-prone, and above all, a nuisance. Yet rats continue to make their presence very well known on New York City streets, in some neighborhoods even more than others. The city plans to zero in on 8 areas so full of vermin the Department of Health has designated them rat mitigation zones. In Manhattan, extra rat fighting patrols will be on hand in Harlem, Chinatown, the East Village, and the Lower East Side. In the Bronx, Grand Concourse, and in Brooklyn, Prospect Heights, Bed-Stuy, and Bushwick. That's where neighbors were able to attest rodents are running rampant. The 8 neighborhoods were deemed high priority thanks to a slew of 311 calls and complaints about infestations. Now those areas will get more attention from the city, like increased enforcement on properties that fail inspections and rat academy training. Free workshops offered by the Department of Health on rat management.
So the question is New York City dirty because it has a lot of rats, or does it have a lot of rats because it's dirty? For a different perspective on this, we thought we would ask Ashley Byrne. She works at PETA, where she's the director of outreach, and she joins us tonight. Ashley, thanks so much for coming on. I think this is a really interesting point. I don't have a lot of rats in my house because I don't have a lot of rotting garbage in my house. And so maybe the problem isn't the rats, it's the people. I hadn't thought about it until you brought it up, but if you wouldn't mind explaining.
Thanks for having me on, Tucker.
Of course.
Exactly. You know, the rats are not the problem. The disgusting human behavior that is attracting the rats, that's the problem. We are basically inviting them to be here by putting out a daily buffet of garbage around the city. And these intelligent creatures don't deserve to die painful, excruciating deaths because of human irresponsibility.
Or shouldn't we at least, I mean, even if you're not going to go as far as you're going, and you're, I think, at the place where you're saying, let's not kill the rats, even if you're kind of for maybe killing some rats, couldn't we also do our part as people and, like, not leave pizza slices on the sidewalk and pick up the garbage regularly? Why shouldn't we play in a role, too?
Exactly. You know, as long as we don't clean up our act, the city can kill as many rats as it wants to.
That's
They're
right.
just going to keep coming back. You know, this is nothing more than a quick fix. If killing rats worked, we wouldn't have a rat problem because people have already been killing rats in this city for decades. But we live under mountains of garbage, so they have not gone away, and they won't.
Who do you, and you obviously study animal behavior, do you think long term the rats are smarter than the leadership of the city, or the city's leadership smarter than the rats?
Well, I'll say this. Rats are actually very clean animals, and they're smart enough not to treat their homes like a garbage dump. So I'll leave it at that.
Ashley Byrne of PETA. You know, you guys have this reputation for being so extreme. I didn't think that was extreme. I thought that was a really good point, and I'm glad that you came on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tucker.
So everything's totally fine. It's just a liberation movement, the transgenderists, except they seem to be blowing stuff up. They detonated explosives at the University of Pittsburgh the other night because somebody said something they didn't like. That's what the transgender movement's up to this week. A student who was there and saw all of it joins us next. Larry Elder has been in California media forever, telling the truth in a really smart and sometimes hilarious way. He just ran for governor of California in a recall election against Gavin Newsom. He came up short after the state's media united to call him a white supremacist. Still makes us laugh. It's pretty offensive, actually. But he's not deterred. He has a major announcement for us tonight. Our friend Larry Elder joins us now. Larry, thanks so much for coming on. I'm sorry to laugh at that. I'm sure it's hard for you to laugh at, but it's so insane. So what are you up to next?
But Tucker, you almost have to laugh at it. It's so ridiculous. And actually, the actual quote was, Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy, Tucker. And the subheadline was, "You've been warned." By the way, one other LA Times columnist referred to my views as white supremacist. Why? Because I'm pro-life, because I don't buy the notion that America is systemically racist, because I want secure borders, because I want us to be energy independent instead of energy dependent, because I know that our urban schools are a disaster. So for all those reasons, I was called the black face of white supremacy and a white supremacist in terms of my views. My announcement, Tucker, is that I'm announcing that I'm running for the presidency of the United States on your program. And thank you so much for giving me this honor and this platform. Of course. My website is elderforpresident.com, elderforpresident.com. And Tucker, the reason I'm doing this is because, you know, my father was a World War II vet. He served on the island of Guam. He was a Marine. First black Marines. They were called Montford Point Marines. My late older brother Kirk was in the Navy during the Vietnam era, and my little brother Dennis actually served in Vietnam in the Army. I'm the only one who didn't serve, and I don't feel good about that. I feel I have a moral, a religious, and a patriotic duty to give back to a country that's been so good to my family and to me, and that is why I'm doing this, Tucker.
Well, that's amazing. Congratulations. It's a big decision to make. I'm very familiar with your views. I think I agree with all of them pretty much. But if you were to narrow it down, just pick one or two, the issues that are animating you, that are making you feel like you've got to put everything on hold and do this. What are they?
Well, aside from the obvious things about the borders I mentioned before, the crime, the maligning of the police, there are a couple of things that I think our side does not spend enough time talking about. And that is the lie, the absolute disgraceful lie that the Democrats put on everything, which is that America is systemically racist. It isn't just a lie, Tucker. It's having real consequences. The police are pulling back. It's called the Ferguson effect or the George Floyd effect. And the people who are harmed by that are the very black and brown people that people on the left claim they care about. There's been a study that shows hundreds, if not thousands of people are now dead because the police are not engaging in proactive policing because they've been demoralized by people calling them racist. The second thing, Tucker, is the 10,000-pound elephant in the room regarding all of this stuff we see in Chicago and some of these other cities with these mass mobs is the lack of fathers in the home. Right now, today in America, 40% of all kids enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother, 70% in the black community, 50% of Hispanics, 25% of whites. Now, that's the same percentage as was the case of blacks back in 1965. The question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we go from having 25% of black kids entering the world in 1965 without a father in the home, married to the mother, to 70% today? And the answer is the welfare state. We've incentivized women to marry the government. We've incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And if I do nothing else in this race but focus people on those two issues, I would have performed a service to my country.
I know that my father had the pivotal effect on my life. Was that true for you? Did your dad have an effect on the man you became?
Absolutely. And my father never knew his biological father, so it's not a death sentence. But my father believed in hard work. He ended up working, when he got out of the military, 2 full-time jobs cleaning toilets, Tucker. Started a little cafe when he was around 47 years old, ran it until his 80s. And when my dad died, he owned the property where the restaurant was, a little piece of property next door to it, plus a house from South Central that we still have in our own family. So the man had died with a net worth of a little bit under $1 million. Not too bad for a kid from Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South, whose mom threw him out of the house at the age of 13. That's what you can do in America. My dad, by the way, was a lifelong Republican. He said this about Democrats. Democrats want to give you something for nothing. When you try to get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something. And my mom was a lifelong, if I said Democrat, I meant Republican. My mom was a lifelong Democrat. And Tucker, they would have arguments over the kitchen table, but nobody called anybody a fascist. Nobody said you only care about the rich. Nobody said you only care about the poor. They were able to debate these things civilly, and we ought to be able to do that in this country.
Amen. That's a really inspiring message. Larry Elder, congratulations on this decision. I'm glad you made the announcement here, and we'll see you again. Thanks.
I appreciate it. Elderforpresident.com.
Amen. So there is an enormous amount all of a sudden of transgenderist violence going on. You're not imagining it. They still won't give you the manifesto from Nashville, but you know exactly what it says. And this violence has the endorsement of the Biden administration, and so it shouldn't surprise you it's becoming more common. At the University of Pittsburgh this week on Tuesday, Michael Knowles was delivering remarks was saying things about biological gender, which is fixed at birth, not by man, but by God. Sorry, that's true. But the transgenderists didn't want to hear it, so an explosive device went off on campus, and then mobs of activists, as we call them, tried to kick Knowles out. Here's what former intelligence officials, some very famous people with a lot of credibility, produced a letter claiming that Hunter Biden's recently discovered laptop was from Russia. It was likely Russian disinformation. That was a lie, and we've suspected it was a lie for more than 2 years now. Now we're learning that lie came directly from Joe Biden and Tony Blinken, now the Secretary of State. That lie was election interference. And yet there was not a single question about this story today at the White House briefing. We, by contrast, will have all the very latest on it in just a moment. But first, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. For centuries, politicians in this country assumed that in order to win an election, you had to convince voters to vote for you. You had to make their case. That was called democracy. But the defining strategic insight of the modern Democratic Party is that you don't really need to convince anyone of anything. What matters is demographics. You need to import enough people from elsewhere, people who are financially dependent on you in order to live. That's the story of the state of California. That's why California changed. It's why Texas is changing. But it's also happening at the local level all over the country. Democrats have realized that they win the vote in virtually every major city. But the suburbs remain contested, and that matters because suburban voters elect school boards and state legislators and, of course, members of Congress. So if you want total control over the entire country, you need demographic change everywhere, including in the suburbs. This is a very obvious insight, and Democrats have been on the case for quite a while. Back in 2009, the Obama administration took the county of Westchester in New York, a solidly Democratic place, to court. Why'd they do that? Well, the administration withheld tens of millions of dollars in federal funding unless Westchester pledged to build 10,000 low-income, high-density apartments in their suburbs. The Obama administration later implemented a rule requiring suburbs to take, quote, affirmative steps to diversify their neighborhoods, or else they would lose federal money. When he took office, Joe Biden threw his support behind something called the HOME Act. Among other things, the HOME Act would allow the federal government to withhold funds from local governments if they didn't find ways to add high-rise apartments or high-density zoning to suburbs. Specifically, the act would have prevented local governments from enacting, quote, ordinances that ban apartment buildings from certain residential areas or set a minimum lot size for a single-family home. So you can't be safe in a leafy suburb anymore. It has to be urbanized. The HOME Act has stalled in Congress. It has never become law. But the Biden administration didn't give up just because democracy didn't produce the results they wanted. They still plan to change the suburbs forever by getting rid of them. Joe Biden's HUD Secretary, Marcia Fudge, a former member of Congress, explained last year that the administration was concerned that African Americans cannot afford homes, not because they're poor, but because home appraisers are racist. Watch.
What the president has said is that we have to look at everything through a lens of equity. And so what we have realized is that people selling homes, just as the persons you were talking about, and even people buying homes, if their appraisal is not correct, what we find, especially as black people in communities of color and underserved communities, is we lose great wealth just through the appraisal process.
Notice here the seizing of the moral high ground. Big picture, if the Biden administration cared about African Americans, they probably wouldn't withdraw the police from America's cities. So, of course, they don't care. But in point of fact, former Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, in the clips you just saw, presented no evidence whatsoever that there are white supremacist home appraisers in this country or that they are running amok. If they exist, who are they? Well, she couldn't tell us, but instead she offered this anecdote.
I live 2 doors from an all-white community. I live in an all-black community. My house is larger than the house 2 doors from me. My lot is larger than the house 2 doors from me. But my house is valued at $25,000 less than the house 2 doors from me. And so once we can start to address and just own up to the fact that we are continuing to discriminate and redline in our housing efforts, then I think that we can make sure that we can start to deal with the racial wealth gap.
Yeah. So, as the left is often telling you, an anecdote is not a study. Noticing something around you doesn't make it universally true. You've proved nothing. You've merely told us a little story. Marcia Fudge's lived experience tells her that there is racism in home appraisals. But there's still no data on that. There's no evidence whatsoever. It is at this point completely made up. But Kamala Harris is convinced completely. Here she was last year.
The home appraisal workforce is one of the least diverse in our nation. Less than 5% of home appraisers in America are people of color. This lack of diversity can introduce both conscious and unconscious biases that make home appraisals less accurate and less fair. Our administration will now require those who conduct appraisals for federal programs must take part in anti-bias, fair housing, and fair lending training. There are solutions. There are solutions.
We're just going to brainwash the home appraisers. We're going to put them in bias training. Really, if you wanted more black home appraisers, why wouldn't you start a program to train them? No. The only job training program this administration has gotten behind in 2.5 years is getting black people to sell more weed in the cities, literally. We're legalizing weed, and we're going to make sure the weed dispensaries have African-American owners. They're not training any black people to be home appraisers. And by the way, the premise of this is itself unproven. That home appraisers are racist? Why do we think that? Again, there's zero evidence of that. It's a slur upon home appraisers, by the way. Why do they deserve this abuse? Well, they don't. They're not hurting anyone. They're accountant types. Why is the administration calling them racist? But they are, and they have been for more than a year. So once again, they're using fake allegations of racism as a pretext for a political plan. And in this case, the plan is to flood the suburbs with voters they believe will support the Democratic Party. It's super simple. They don't deserve the moral high ground just because they're throwing race around or claiming they speak on behalf of black people. Kamala Harris is claiming to speak on behalf of black people. Right, okay. That doesn't mean that they're right. But no one's stopping them. So without any vote in Congress, the Biden administration has just introduced a rule, not a law, a rule that will punish Americans who've tried to do the right thing, punish people with high credit scores. The people with high credit scores will pay higher fees on their mortgage payments to subsidize people who haven't maintained good credit. So these rules take effect on May 1st, whether you like it or not. And they mean that anyone with good credit, that's defined as a score of 680 or above, is going to have to pay roughly $40 a month extra on their mortgage fees than those with lower scores on home loans of around $400,000. So here's an example. If you have a FICO score of 620, you get a 1.75% discount on your mortgage fees. If you have a 740 score, in other words, you pay your bills on time, you've done the right thing, you're a good citizen, you have to pay 1% more. So you don't get a discount for doing the right thing and paying your bills, you get punished. We are incentivizing bad behavior. We're hurting the good people. Since the day you were born, you have been told, pay your debts. It's not your money. You borrowed it from somebody else. You have to pay it back. If you don't, it's stealing. Now we're saying, if you don't steal, we're going to hurt you. And in real life, that means that over the course of a 30-year mortgage for a $400,000 home, that's a swing of more than $14,000. And they're claiming racism to justify this. Black Americans are the only racial group in this country with average credit scores of under 680. Now, why is that? We don't know. Whites, Hispanics, Asians have higher credit scores. Therefore, as you'd expect, the mortgage denial rate for African-American borrowers is higher than the overall population. It's double in this country's biggest markets. And that's the reason the suburbs have different demographics from the cities. That's called economics. Now, if you wanted to change that, you would encourage people to have good spending habits and pay back their debt. But they don't care about that. Making people happier, getting them out of debt. No, they want to change the suburbs, make them denser, so there'll be more reliably Democratic voting. That's the bottom line. It's always about election results. It's always about power. It's not about improving anybody's life. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party's donors in private equity, of course, are happy that it'll be even harder for Americans with good credit to buy homes. Why? Because that will mean more renters of homes they own.
Home ownership is increasingly out of reach.
In our portfolio, the majority
cannot buy a home, cannot afford to buy a home, or don't have the credit to buy the homes. I think if you asked a lot of millennials, and that tends to be our primary resident, they would probably tell you that they don't necessarily desire to own a home or to own a car. And they've grown up in the sharing economy, and for what's important to them is lifestyle, right? And so if they can move into this, what we call a turnkey or hotel-ready home, and have a low-maintenance lifestyle, that's very compelling for them.
People don't want to they don't want to own anything. They want to be penniless and impoverished, live at the whims of oligarchs. That's really what they want. Do you own anything, Mr. Oligarch guy? She never asked. Stephanie Pomboy is an economist, CEO of Macro Maven. She joins us tonight to assess. Stephanie, thanks so much for coming on. So as always, the beneficiaries of these schemes are never the people who they tell you they are. Oh, the oppressed, the hopeless in our inner cities. It's always their donors who are buying up residential homes and turning them into rental properties. I mean, that's who's winning here, Democratic donors.
Gee, you think? You know, I'm reminded of that old expression, those who refuse to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We tried this exercise under George Bush when they decided that we needed to create a home ownership society. And, you know, the Bush administration, in conjunction with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you'll recall Franklin Raines and Barney Frank, all got in and decided that we needed to make it easier for people to become homeowners. And we all remember how well that whole situation worked out. But I would argue this situation is even more sinister than what you outlined in terms of trying to get people to move to the suburbs and, you know, basically cajole them into home ownership, because we are on the doorstep of another deflating home bubble right now. So essentially what they're doing is they're encouraging people to stretch into homes that they couldn't otherwise afford, precisely as the floor is about to fall out underneath them as prices decline. And we got existing homes sales as reported by the National Association of Realtors yesterday, and it reflects the second back-to-back month of declining home prices. So it's here already. And we have seen sales volumes just collapse at a speed that is even faster than we saw during the housing bubble bust. And that presages an equally substantial decline on prices. So I think we will, again, for only the second time in our history, see nationwide home prices decline. So this idea that now is the time to encourage people who can't otherwise afford to get into homes to do so is really, really dangerous. These people will probably be underwater in their homes before they even get the keys. Then what? Then what kind of policy are they going to prescribe? You know, I shudder to imagine. And, you know, it goes without saying, Tucker, or it should, that the reason homes are increasingly unaffordable for people is because we have spent over a decade pushing money into this economy with reckless monetary and fiscal policy that inflated a massive bubble in housing that now the Fed is raising rates to dampen. So you have a combination of inflated home prices and higher interest rates that have made it unaffordable. It's not racism that's making homes unaffordable. It's reckless policy, and they're layering more reckless policy on top to solve it.
So nicely put. So nicely put. This is what asset inflation looks like for the average person. Stephanie Pomboy, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tucker.
So you will remember in the one debate of the 2020 election, Joe Biden said on stage that the laptop story, his son's laptop, was, quote, Russian disinformation. That sounded ludicrous, but he was able to cite dozens of former high-level and very famous intelligence officials to prove he was right. Now we're learning what we suspected all along. That was a lie, and it was a lie that came from Joe Biden and now Secretary of State Tony Blinken. That was election interference. And yet, amazingly, not one reporter asked a question about that story in today's White House briefing. We turn now, as we always do, with gratitude to Fox's Kevin Corke to fill in the blanks. Hey, Kevin.
Good to see you, my friend. This is really quite a story. Former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morrell testified before the House Judiciary and Intel committees. And during that testimony, he revealed that not only did the Biden campaign help to strategize about the public release of the now infamous statement, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who was then a senior advisor for the campaign, was the impetus of that public statement signed back in October of 2020 that implied the laptop belonging to Hunter Biden was Russian disinformation. Now, it gets worse than that. As you know, 51 former intel officials, including men like John Brennan, James Clapper, who's already lied before Congress, Leon Panetta, signed on to the letter claiming that it had, quote, all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. Well, now, congressional leaders, including Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan and Intel Chair Mike Turner, are asking Blinken to explain himself. They're demanding he not only identify the people with whom he communicated about drafting the statement, they want him to produce all the documents referring to it. And they've given him until May the 4th at 5 p.m. to comply. Now, critics also add this to further underscore the increasingly worrisome ties between the security state and the Democratic Party, that Deputy Director Morell testified that not only did he help the Biden campaign and not only did they help with the letter, he said he did so in part because he wanted to help them win the election. Tucker.
What a story.
Yeah.
Kevin Corke, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Well, it's been nearly a month since a transgenderist terrorist murdered 6 people, 3 children as well, at a Nashville school, a Christian school. And yet the FBI and local police are still hiding that shooter's manifesto from the public. You're not allowed to see it. Why is that? More next. Earlier this month, a man with psychiatric problems murdered 5 people at a bank in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, no one has told us what pharmaceuticals this man was taking. You'd think that would be the first question our authorities would ask. No one has asked, no one ever will ask. But officials have released details of the manifesto he left behind. They're telling us the shooter wanted to prove a point about how easy it is for the mentally ill to buy guns. Now, of course, that's a Democratic talking point, so you're allowed to hear it and marinate in it. But interestingly, the FBI and Metro Nashville police are still refusing to release any information about the motives behind the murder of children at a Christian school several weeks ago. The manifesto written by the transgenderist mass shooter remains hidden from the rest of us. The public cannot see that. Why? Clay Travis is the founder of Outkick. He's also the co-host of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. He joins us tonight. Clay, thanks so much for coming on. You would think that in a free country, you'd be allowed to know why something like this happened. Why can't we know?
I think because it doesn't fit the narrative. Thanks for having me on, Tucker. I'm a born and raised Nashvilleian. This hits particularly close to me. I've got 3 kids in school in Nashville. Like any parent, when you hear a story like this, your heart stops. And that's why we need to do everything we can to prevent another shooting like this. Why did this shooter target this particular location? What can we learn from that targeting? And how do we help to prevent this from happening anywhere else? Until we know the motivations of the shooter and we can debate and discuss them, it's very hard to figure out how to guarantee that this does not happen again. And so, look, if this were a Donald Trump supporting, MAGA hat wearing, right-wing lunatic who had committed this murder and wrote a manifesto justifying it based on his support for Donald Trump and Fox News, the Washington Post and New York Times would have had this story 30 minutes after police and the FBI were able to review it. As you said in the tease, it's been nearly a month. Monday will mark 4 full weeks since this attack happened. It is inexcusable. It is indefensible. There is no justification whatsoever for the American public not to have had access to this document.
I don't, and of course, if they're withholding information, they're almost by definition lying to you. Lack of transparency is the first sign of corruption. The state has a Republican governor, I think, sort of. Why doesn't he just take the information and put it on his Twitter feed? Why are Republicans putting up with this and participating in this propaganda campaign?
You got 8 congressmen who are Republicans from Tennessee. You've got both senators and you've got a governor, and all of them live in the Nashville area. So I would encourage all of them. I like them all. I would encourage all of them, all of the Republican elected officials, to go after the FBI here and figure out why this is not being released. And I think, frankly, the Nashville Police Department should come out and tell us if the FBI has stepped in and tried to Bigfoot them and keep this from being released. This needs to be out there. Everybody needs to be able to see it. Again, Tucker, to me, and I'm speaking as a Nashvilleian with 3 kids in public school, 2 kids in public school, 1 kid in private school in Nashville, we all deserve to know.
Of course, it's our country, not theirs. And the governor could do it today, and I hope that he will. Clay Travis, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Great to see you as well, Tucker. This is important.
I think it is. So fentanyl, killings by fentanyl, now the leading cause of avoidable death among people under 45 in this country. Why is this happening? Well, it's happening because China is flooding our country with this, and it's coming up through Mexico. It's here because our southern border is open. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have died because of this. Nobody in Washington cares. Mark Meckler cares. On April 29th, he's organizing a How Many More rally at the state capitol in Austin, Texas. The goal is to end the crisis at the border and push back against the Mexican drug cartels and their Chinese masters who are killing so many Americans. Mark Meckler joins us tonight with a preview of what to expect on April 29th. Mark, thank you first for doing this and second for coming on to tell us about it. What are we going to see April 29th in Austin?
Well, what we hope you see is thousands of people flooding in from all over Texas and all over the country for the How Many More rally. And what you're going to see is folks are coming together to expose the real truth of this problem. The problem is of a magnitude much greater than is mostly being reported on television. I've been looking into this for the last few weeks. You mentioned hundreds of thousands of people dead from fentanyl. Right now, it's 70,000 a year, 1 every 7 minutes. 30% of women at least being raped as they come up and into this country. Young children being sold into sexual slavery. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell the truth about what's going on. We're going to tell that truth to the American people broadly.
I mean, there is once again, you have the same situation you have across the country. You have a Republican governor who's actively collaborating with the left. I mean, Texas has a National Guard. For 2 years, I've wondered, why doesn't the governor of your state just close the border with his own troops? Why is that hard? No one's ever answered that question.
Yeah, you know, and Tucker, you did an interview with him not too long ago, and you said he would essentially be a folk hero if he would close the border. We agree with that. What we're trying to do here is set the stage for Governor Abbott to do the right thing. There are bills pending in the Texas legislature that would create a border protection unit under the control of Governor Abbott. We believe this is necessary to repel the invasion, and make no mistake, it is an invasion as defined by the United States Constitution. It is an invasion of historic proportions. The governor has the ability to do stuff about it. The legislature has the ability to do things about it. We're asking them to come together, and we're going to put the pressure on to make sure that they do so.
Yeah, but John Cornyn, your senator, will spend an hour telling you about how terrible the invasion of Ukraine is and never mention the one happening in his state. It's unbelievable. Mark Meckler, Godspeed, April 29th, Austin, Texas, the rally. Thanks.
Thank you.
So Netflix is doing some kind of show on ancient Egypt, but there has been an uproar in modern Egypt about the way they have cast the role of Cleopatra. One man is suing Netflix for the way they're depicting her. Details straight ahead.
Discrimination against LGBTQI, plus Americans.
That was the President of the United States, senile, stumbling as always, in this case over the latest acronym for the pronoun people. For the record, it's called LGBTQIA+. Plus, you see the plus mark all over the place now. We went shopping for Mother's Day cards today at a Rite Aid and saw an entire category for LGBTQIA+ cards. And it got us wondering, who's in the plus category? Are we in the plus category? We feel like we're a net addition. We're the plus people. Any plus person out there is always welcome to come on this show and explain what's so plus about you. But in the meantime, Chadwick Moore of The Spectator has thought a lot about this. We thought we would speak to him about it tonight. Chadwick, thanks so much for coming on. So who's in the plus? And look, I don't want to make this personal. I don't want to get my feelings hurt. But do I qualify in the plus category? And if not me, who?
Oh, you absolutely 100% do. I mean, it's unfortunate.
Thank you.
I've been lobbying Big Gay for a long time. Yes, welcome to the community, Tucker. I've been lobbying Big Gay for a long time to get an S in the alphabet. You know, we should have an S in there for straight people, but of course they won't let us have that for some reason.
I agree.
But thankfully we have the plus. Now, it really, they pretend to be so inclusive, and yet here they are excluding 96% of the population. But they hide it in that plus. So you can hide there in the plus somewhere down the alphabet. It kind of signifies that much like the struggle for justice and equality itself, the alphabet people are kind of nebulous and extend into perpetuity. They're kind of undefinable. And that is what the plus is for. Anyone can be plus.
But can I just ask, and I think you told me once you've been banned from gay bars since you started coming on the show, so maybe you haven't had the experience recently, but like when was the last time you were in a bar and someone came up and said, I'm part of the, I'm the plus, I'm the fabled, I'm the Loch Ness Monster, I'm the plus you hear about but have never seen. Has anyone ever said that to you?
Yeah, we're the minuses too, like, hey, I'm a plus, you're a minus when we get together tonight, Sort of charge. I think we need to start going around and asking people if they're pluses. Exactly. Well, one thing that's funny too is like the Q. Nobody really knows what the Q stands for.
I don't either.
Like,
I agree with
what's
that.
What's a queer? No one knows what it is. No one knows what it is.
Is that really true? I mean, I guess you're not allowed to ask questions. You just have to sort of nod and be like, oh yeah, QIA plus. But what a sincere question is someone who I think still lives in Brooklyn, like, is there a real definition for that?
Well, I'll tell you what my definition of queer is. Essentially, there's two types of queers. There's the sort of run-of-the-mill gay man who lives in Brooklyn. You can probably spot him by having like a dangly earring and some really bad eyewear. And he calls himself queer because he wants to feel special. He wants to think he's unique. That's the first type of queer. The second type of queer is really just a straight woman who wants to add a little pizzazz to herself. So she thinks she's boring. She thinks she's basic. She maybe has like some gay friends. She maybe once like kissed a girl in college. So she can now call herself queer or somewhere in the pluses. But queer has been quite helpful for many people. Queer kind of does the job of the plus anyway, to be honest.
Not my world, but absolutely fascinating. And as a believer in precision in language, I am so grateful that you helped us define that tonight. Chadwick Moore, thank you. Heaven's Gate. Remember that? It was a cult founded in the 1970s by a former seminarian called Marshall Applewhite and his girlfriend, Bonnie Lou Nettles. Members of the cult believed they were part of an alien species trapped in human form. Applewhite taught them to give up all human attachments, their relationships with their families, their friends, their jobs, their possessions, ultimately their names, their genders, and their own bodies. Sound familiar? Well, in 1995, the discovery of the Hale-Bopp comet convinced Marshall Applewhite that his prophecies were about to come true. So what did he do? Well, in pursuit of androgynous immortality, he castrated himself and encouraged his fellow cultists to do the same, and many did. They castrated themselves at a clinic in Mexico. Then 2 years later, at Applewhite's direction, the cult committed mass suicide in a house outside San Diego. 38 people died. You can go on Wikipedia and read all about it, and we recommend that you do. Why? Because once again, it sounds familiar. Heaven's Gate is proof that when religious fanatics command you to surrender your gender and become androgynous, castrate yourself and your children, it's probably not going to end well. So we spent last week talking a lot about the leaker, the 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman, who brought forward documents proving the Biden administration has been lying about the war in Ukraine for more than a year. Now we know that there are, in fact, boots on the ground, American special forces fighting in Ukraine. We also know that Ukraine is losing that war. Most media outlets are telling you the opposite. They're telling you, in fact, to focus on the leaker, not what he leaked. But Senator Mike Braun of Indiana is one of the very few Republicans in the Senate who is concerned about the substance of this story. What do these documents reveal, and how should we respond? Senator Braun joins us tonight. Senator, thank you so much for coming on and for paying attention to what matters, not the kid, but what he showed us. What do you think these documents say, and how should we respond to them?
Yeah, we've been engaged over there for over a year, and all you heard was transparency, and we will not have troops on the ground. Sadly, you get the information like this. Just a few days ago, we sent off a letter, tell us who authorized this, how many are actually there, what are they doing. This is eerily familiar to what we should have learned decades ago in Vietnam, getting engaged in these things where mission creep comes into play, Afghanistan, Iraq. looks like it's reeling all over again. Big difference is this is where 2 world wars were started. Much different setting, much different context. We're going to make sure that we get to the bottom of it. It's supposed to give us an answer by May 2nd.
What's so distressing when you hear that is you're not a talk show host on a cable news channel. You're a sitting United States senator who was elected by your entire state, and one of your jobs is to provide oversight of the Pentagon. And if they held that information from you, they hid it from you, I mean, that seems like a very big deal.
It's a big deal, and it's not the first time. Look at how many other times within agencies in the Biden administration. Look how they've used executive orders when they bypass the legislative process. This is clear. If you're going to deploy troops, that's a congressional responsibility from the 73 Wars Powers Act. There's so much in this administration that they use the agencies, if they can't get it done legislatively, let's just force the issue. Here, I think they've really pushed the envelope.
We've spent so much time pounding on your Republican colleagues in the Senate for ignoring this stuff, and then we learned that you were, I think, rightly incensed by it. Can you give us a sense of how many of your fellow Republicans in the Senate share your views on this?
Let's look at it this way. When I ran as an outsider, so I look at things differently. And this relates to like this budget mess we're in as well. There are at least 10 to 15 neocons. These are the most aggressive of the defense hawks. I think it's the most important thing we do, but I hold defense accountable. This is how this happens. So there are generally, in a really weird way, 10 to 15 Republicans that team up now with all Democrats to give us the budget mess we've got and then go along with this foreign escapade stuff. We cannot be the police of the world. We pay all the bills over there now. Where's the EU handling its fair share of this? So much is wrong. We just have to be careful here.
You know, from the outside, that's exactly what it looks like, but it's really interesting to hear that confirmed from the inside. And I believe your voters are behind you on this. So we appreciate your coming on and for what you're doing.
You bet.
Senator Mike Braun of Indiana, thanks. So the other night we interviewed a pizza delivery man called Tyler Morrell, who was not only a hero, he helped stop an armed robbery, he was also a great guy, and we wanted to taste his pizza. And next we will.
Today.
The other night, we interviewed a heroic pizza delivery man called Tyler Morrell, and ever conscious of the opportunity to use our job to get free food, we thought we'd like to taste your pizza. Tyler Morrell joins us in studio. He will deliver literally anywhere. Tyler, it is so great to meet you in person.
A couple Coco's pies.
So these are from Coco's, established 1978. Everybody loves Coco's Pizza.
That's right.
Where's Coco's based?
Aston, Pennsylvania, and Delaware County.
Delaware County, best part of the state.
I think we have a special
cheese pies.
We have a special pie for you here. Here's Tucker's pie.
So I am, as you can likely tell, a pizza aficionado. I was a pizza delivery boy for 2 years.
Is it warm at all?
Yeah, it's totally warm. These warmers are just like one of the great wonders of science. This is sausage.
That's sausage
and pineapple. And really quick, as a pizza professional, do you look down on this order? Is this?
I do. I think that I consider a criminal.
I knew you did. I used to deliver pizzas and calzones. I considered immoral, but I delivered them anyway.
It's actually still hot. It's actually still hot. All the way from Philly.
It's so good. It's unbelievable. And you are a hero. How's your leg, by the way? Your leg was injured by the the car thief.
It's got a bone bruise on it. Down here.
Oh, damn, I can see it.
Yeah, it's not too bad, though.